Hello, we are here again. Hope everybody's fine. God, I hate my voice. We'll wait for some people to get in here. Go away. Okay, feel free to say hi. Feel free to ask questions. What did I title this stream? Something about American posture. I don't even know. We're going to be talking about posture for sure. American English pronunciation using mouth posture and other details. That's very vague. Matan is here. Welcome. Hello. One of my students. Unless you happen to share a username, then that's creepy. Anyway, don't drink soda. Soda's bad for you. Hashtag not sponsored. God, it's not even cold anymore. That sucks. So, what's up, people? What are we doing? How are we feeling today? The world is a crazy place. Very, very crazy place. I guess I'll just jump into something then, because the start of the stream is always blah, right? Blah. I see that for some reason my most popular video in my analytics has for a while now been one of the shadowing videos, or I talked about like shadowing tips. So I think you guys are hungry for shadowing. That maybe we could talk a little bit more about that today. Shadowing is kind of hard for me to teach because like it comes very intuitively, very naturally. It's like I have to demonstrate it. It's hard to explain. It just sort of happens for me. But we can talk about that if you guys want. Just let me know. Last time, there was something I forgot to mention in the last stream, which was I said towards the beginning of the stream something like I've seen like I've lifted the veil to the matrix or whatever on like how everything's connected. And we can kind of start there, I guess. Let me go to this message that I sent. So basically, I was having a conversation with a student, and sort of like it's a student that I worked with a while ago, and they're still trying to like fine tune some things. And they were saying how like maybe it's their intonation, maybe whatever. And I'm just going to read what I wrote because I think I wrote it very well, but I won't be able to like ad-lib that. So what I've realized recently is that posture is tied to breath. Breath is tied to linking, and linking on a fundamental level, not a special rule level, creates the base of the rhythm in combination with stress. Meaning all these things work to create the proper rhythm in one way or another. Intonation is the manipulating of stress, articulation, bounded within the limits of posture, and linking to some extent, which help to create a specific intonation pattern, right? So even if you're like enunciating more, you're going to have a little bit of a different rhythm. You might have a slightly different intonation. So all these details, the way you're linking, the way you're stressing, they can affect the rhythm. Now there's sort of a base rhythm that, is roughly universal in the language, but once we bring in like emotion and context and level of enunciation and all these different kinds of things, you will get sort of a different rhythm. So rhythm isn't actually so simple, but if you build from the ground up, starting from the posture, even though posture isn't directly related to the rhythm, you can sort of more naturally just sort of get the proper thing. We do that in the course, throughout the course. Anyway, so as I was saying, intonation is the manipulating of stress, articulation, linking, which help to create a specific intonation pattern, which is then further laced with meaning within the speaker and listener's minds, right? Like ending a thought with tossing the thought to the listener, which is a question, or expressing sadness or anger, kind of like what I was saying there, if we go beyond the basics of intonation. So posture actually has an indirect effect all the way up to the top of the chain. So if we imagine like posture, sounds are kind of at the same level, but posture is under the sounds. Posture, sounds, um, we have like the linking and the stress, like how we start linking sounds together into words, into sentences, inside a word, between words. It's all one big flow. Stress gets thrown into that mix depending on, content and this and that, whatever. And then intonation is sort of that overarching icing on the cake, where everything sort of comes together, and we can add extra meaning using intonation. So that's what I mean, all the way up the chain, right? Posture actually has an indirect effect all the way up to the chain, which is intonation, all the way up to the top of the chain, which is intonation. But you have to stitch all the pieces together in the correct way in order to sound natural. And that's where the course is currently headed. I sent this message on the 14th of December. And I said, I seem to have reached posture enlightenment, lol, LOL. The course will never include advanced intonation because that's not the focus of the course. I hate teaching intonation. It's uncomfortable for me. It's not, it doesn't work with my brain very well to teach that. MMG Craft is here. Hi, welcome. So unfortunately, like beyond the sort of special mini course that I gave, that you can find on the channel, talking about how intonation generally works, and there's like emotional intonation. I forget all the ones that I said: emotional intonation, structural intonation, and then there's another one. Can't remember off the top of my head because I don't usually teach that stuff. But of course, does include intonation basics. We can talk a little bit about some variations and stuff, but that's not the focus. That's the top of the chain. Mouth posture is the bottom of the chain. So we focus a lot on the bottom, the sounds, linking them together, getting the stress. The higher up we go through the chain, the less of a focus that we're on the mouth posture. And but the mouth posture does create that ground level that you can then stack everything on top of more easily and more efficiently than if you didn't do mouth posture. It like straight from the beginning, it starts to give you a more concrete, fundamental ground. So even if you're looking to improve your intonation, like if that's all you need, then sure, like just go to intonation because you already probably sound pretty good. But the more of an accent you have, the more work that you need to do, the more you want to start from the posture, not the top. There's benefit in top-down stuff, but we don't really worry too much about that in this particular course. Anyway, so I thought that was cool because I can sort of see how everything's like connected now. And by the way, I visualize this. I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen here. Because based on how based on how I see things, I usually like use my hands in a way that I think communicates a lot of stuff to you guys. This is my posture map. We're going to ignore that. Just going to draw. I hope you guys can see my screen. It says sharing. Looks like, yeah. Okay, we should be good. I see skill development. I've talked about this before in a couple streams. It's like an upside down pyramid. All right, and then you have different levels in that pyramid. You could look at it as a regular, like not upside down pyramid too. That does work, but I think it's more succinct and accurate to talk about it this way because it's like, what is everything coming down to? Like what's the lowest point? But if you flip it upside down, you can say, okay, well, if you're looking at it this way, this is like the base fundamental level that supports the pyramid. That's another way to look at it. That's fine too. There's no right or wrong. This is just what works best in my brain, because I see that if I start at the smallest fundamental point and then I add and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, that makes more sense to me on how skills works. And this isn't just for English. It's not just for language. You can apply this to a whole bunch of different stuff. That's not the focus of our stuff today, but you would have like posture. Well, technically posture would be like here. In my original pyramid map, I had sounds at the thing, but of course the posture is underneath that. They kind of link together. You can't really have posture without sounds and sounds without posture. Obviously they kind of go together. But but the posture is under the sounds. And then you have like we'd say linking, right? So that would include taking two sounds, putting them together, taking two words, putting them together. There's no real barrier between those unless you choose to put a barrier for enunciation. So if you add zif, all right, it's all becomes like one big word. Doesn't matter if you're going a to z or z to I or I to f. When we put it all together, we tend to kind of just put that thought as one big chain. So linking applies to 2, 3, 4 sounds inside of a word, 2, 3, 4 sounds between two words. Doesn't really matter. Then we would have like distress, right? There's a couple ways to look at this. You can look at linking and stress as sort of on the same level, but I would like, let's say I transcribe, give you guys another transcription example of how my current method works. So if I say like, he told her it was nice. Okay, whatever, something like that. And then I would say like, okay, he told her, we can drop the H, we can say told her. We can kind of flap the D, we won't, we'll just keep it as like a regular D, told her. So it sounds like older, told her it was, this one doesn't have a lot of stress. That happens sometimes. Nice. Okay. So something like this. So if I don't stress those, right, this would be the linking chain. So it's like, okay, that's great. It's also a little hard to read. Unfortunately, as I said before, there's no like perfect way to represent auditory, like spoken language in visual symbols because it's auditory. It can never be truly represented visually. You can create a system, a consistent system of transcription, whether that's IPA or you use my system or whatever, and that helps. But at the end of the day, it's still a visual symbol, and you're seeing the sound. You're actually seeing the letters because sounds can't be seen, right? Focus on your ears, not your eyes. It seems philosophical, but it actually is relevant and very important for your learning. But then we have our posture and our sounds. That's sort of given. We transcribe our linking. Okay. Then we add the stress. So I would layer the stress on top of that. Okay. So literally it kind of just follows the pyramid. I'm just adding the stress where it goes. And then on top of that, we would have intonation. Whoops, I go back to purple. Terrible writing, tonation, something kind of like that, right? Another way to look at this is like sounds to words to sentences to paragraphs. That's another method of how to like stack things, especially if you're looking at the written language instead of the spoken language. Because like you don't speak a paragraph, you read a paragraph, right? Like your words can be put into a paragraph visually to organize it. But so kind of depends on what version we're talking about, but this would be like the spoken language pyramid. And it kind of gives us a nice little conceptual framework for how everything is linked. And then the posture does indirectly, because it's the foundational ground, it does indirectly affect the linking, it affects the stress, it affects the intonation. Now, off the top of my head, I can't think of specific examples for that. They usually come up in the course of like teaching things and whatever. So sorry, I'm terrible thinking of things off the top of my head. But if I happen to think of one while we're doing this live stream, I will give you an example of like how posture affects this or whatever. Actually, I can think of an example for stress right now. Let me check the comments. Let me actually break this out over here. Bring this over here. Why am I doing that? I could just break the chat out. Pop out chat. Yay. Okay. You guys are quiet today. Come on. What are we doing? Nobody's saying anything. I feel so lonely. It's like I'm just talking to myself. Anyway, that's fine. So for stress, right? Like let's see if I can think of an example here. My bad. I assume that's my bad. I don't know if that's more of a shorthand way to write it these days, but that makes sense. Mib, mib. Anyway, um, so posture, obviously, like let's use as an example. As a pretty nice example, I think it's relatively easy. Um, so if we have, like, let's say cat, right? That's a pretty common word, basic a word, used as an example. I don't know why I'm drawing, I could just be typing, but so the posture, and we can use this as sort of like a little mini lesson on how the posture also works instead of just how it links to the stress. Okay, so we have the sound k, we have the sound a, we have the sound t, right? Okay, so where's the k sound? Well, k is on the back of the tongue. Now, as I may have mentioned in a couple recent live streams, technically speaking, although a couple sounds could be here, and I think that still works, the way that I'm currently teaching it, that actually tends to be more efficient and easier for people, is we're going to say every single back of tongue sound is on the middle of the back. Now, you might say, how do I know the difference between the front of the back and the middle of the back and the back of the back? That's something that you get to learn and become very familiar with through the course. Most people, when they start, they're like, I don't know what that means. I can't even feel the back. I tell people, hey, how do you do a K sound in your language? And they're like, it just happens. I don't feel anything happening because there's less sort of nerve endings back here for various reasons. We don't want to feel our uvula, little ball, being flicked around all day. That'd be very annoying. And so people have to learn how to sort of feel this area. That's very normal, right? Hey, teacher, for Chinval. I think I had trouble pronouncing your name last time as well. I'm sorry. Welcome. Yes. So anyway, all sounds on the back of the tongue are in the middle of the back. Okay. If you have an ah, you're probably going to open the jaw a little bit. There's a little range there. It could be anywhere from, say, here to here. It's not too big of a range. Doesn't really matter. You can get a little bit of height. Because remember, we're learning the cot merger, which is, for various reasons, the thing. Go watch my lesson on ah if you want to learn more about that. If you do, say, an like in book, okay, you could put it here. That's the way I traditionally taught it. Or you can use this. I actually find this is more efficient and easier for people. Like I fixed the like the way I'm teaching the is in book now. People are just like getting it. Like almost everybody I tell it to, they just get it. We have to talk about the root for that. We're not going to worry about that right now. We can come back to that if you guys want. But you're going to sort of take this, squeeze it forward, like you're trying to like squish it into the front of the back. And there's a little range for that as well. It could be a little low. It could be a little high. There's actually, it doesn't necessarily matter. It could be, some sounds have that. They have bigger ranges than others. We're just going to say it's about here. The O would be maybe somewhere around here-ish. Could be a little lower than the depends on where you place the oo is going to be maybe, oh sorry, what am I doing? I gotta get it more in line there. Okay, oo is going to be maybe here, w is going to be maybe more here, and then k is going to be right here. This is the start of the soft palate. You do not want to touch the hard palate with when you're doing the k. Right now, technically, because this is connected and this is connected, you can't just pull up this little tiny strip of your tongue. It doesn't work that way, right? This wants to stay down in the posture. That's part of the 5 that I've been talking about. This is also part of the 5, so that's going to dig in all of these sounds. Okay. That's what we would call resistance in the 5. 5 is this posture piece here. Look at some the past couple live streams for more information on that if this is new to you. And because of that, this is trying to stay locked in and locked down, but it's going to kind of pull the back up or the front of the back up with it a little bit. It's going to kind of pull the front of the back up with it a little bit. So you're going to get like that. But when you do a K, one of the keys to a nice, good, crisp English K is that you want to be touching with as little surface area as possible. It's almost like the front is sort of hanging, the back is sort of hanging, and the middle part of that is just sort of touching. Good, clear contact. Okay, you want it to be enough to sort of block the breath. But you don't want to be pushing too hard. You don't want to be super flat using like the whole back. A lot of languages, either because the tongue is pushed forward or because they just happen to use this part more, the back of the back will tend to kind of come up and touch this as well. Some languages will push the back all the way up here to do the K. Spanish, to me, as far as I can tell, it seems like they take this part and they put it maybe more or less where would put our case, because they're kind of like this more. So it's like like casa, 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 instead of casa, 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 casa. Creates a little bit of a different sound. Okay. Anyway, because of that, you can maybe feel a tiny bit of touching with this part as it gets sort of pulled up. That's not necessarily a problem, but you don't have to. And my general recommendation is try to avoid that, because you want to be sort of like, you want to try to follow like these little guideposts so that you know that you're doing the right thing. So try to stay off of the hard palate. You're never going to touch the hard palate with a back of tongue sound. K is the only one that kaganga are the only ones that touch. So those are the other ones you have to worry about. But your tongue should never be lined up here unless maybe you're squeezing this forward for an. That's it, right? Okay, so that was a long-winded way of laying out where the sounds on the back of the tongue are, but the K itself is here. So back of the tongue is going to come up. It's going to touch here. Okay, that's our starting sound. That's the K. Now, what does the posture do in the K? Virgin is a way to address someone named Fernando. Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that. So I guess it would be like Virgin. That kind of makes sense. That sounds very diminutive. Fernando. Okay. Or in Portuguese, more like Fernando, something like that. I don't know. My Portuguese is worse than my Spanish. I don't actually speak Portuguese. I just imitate it. Is it okay if the front gets engaged when lifting the back? So that's actually a perfect segue to kind of what I was about to go into. Since we're still on the K, right? There's so much information we can go into just for one sound, because it's not just how do you articulate it, it's what does the posture do, right? And don't worry, I'm not going to forget our point here. If I do forget, remind me. This is what started this whole chain. How does the posture affect the stress? Hopefully I can make that make sense and bring it back in, but we're going to start making this a mini posture lesson, and then we're going to work our way up the chain. How does it link? How does it stress? Not necessarily how the posture affects it, because I may not be able to think of that off the top of my head for this example, but I'm going to try to give you all the information all the way up the chain. Okay. What does the posture do for the K? Just the K, not even talking about the whole word. Okay. So we know that, right, the sides of the middle are lifted in our normal position. We always have this shape in every sound. Doesn't matter if you're lifting the front, if you're lifting the back, if you're opening the jaw, you always have this shape. Sometimes, like in ah versus ah, you won't see that shape as well in the ah. You'll definitely see it in the ah. It's very easy to see in the ah. But it's still there. The sort of shaping and tension is still there. So it may not always be like the exact same degree. But to me, when I do ah and ah, the reason why it's very clear, part of the reason why it's very clear in ah is because I really have to add a lot of resistance, because ah, as we'll talk about, it wants to sort of destroy the posture and pull it this way. So it gets really dug in, where ah, it doesn't need a lot of resistance. And so when you open, you might not actually see it very well, especially because the jaw's opening. The tongue maybe is, it's not in its normal sort of even from front to back position. It's kind of angled now. So just keep that in mind. You won't always see the exact same shape, but you should be trying to keep that same tension and structure of that shape, even if you open the jaw. That's important. So we have our shape there. We have our fourth tooth. The fourth tooth is actually not the important piece. That helps us make sure we're not too far forward or too far back, along with our other four lines. This is one of the lines. That's why the sounds are there. And then if you open the jaw, the part of the tongue that was touching the fourth tooth is going to go right back up onto that same spot. There's a little wiggle room forward to back, not a whole lot, but so you can kind of do that a little bit, but you generally want to keep it kind of lined up. We don't really like pushing forward or back. Again, can get a little wiggly with that. As long as you counter with the posture in the back, you can kind of push the forward. You don't have to do that to do the sound, unlike what some teachers tell you. Okay, so you have that shape. When you go to the K, right, if you go to K, right, we learn how to do everything in the and then we transition. When we learn a new sound, we learn how to transition so that we can keep the posture while we do the sound. So you lift the back of the tongue, And the more that this goes up, the more that you might have to resist here or here or here, whatever piece we're talking about. So if I go, I do feel that there's a little bit of a pull, like it wants to pull this up. It wants to maybe pull this up like just as a whole, or maybe pull it like a little sort of like this. It wants to shallow it a little bit. And so I don't feel a lot of resistance here in the one and the two. Remember, one is down, two is wide, wide and relaxed. Um, so the shape should feel the same. You shouldn't really feel any change, but you can feel resistance, a little bit of tension trying to hold it in place because the K is going to try to pull it into itself, right? um, so just make sure you keep your one and your two there. If you feel that it's coming up, you feel it's getting shallow, fix it. Add some resistance. Okay. We have that was one and two. We have our three and our four down here. Oops. 3, 4. Okay. Again, the 3 and the 4 is just the seatbelt. 4 is on the sides. 3 is in the middle. I separate them for various reasons, but most of the time you just have to worry about the 3. Most languages, they tend to push this higher for their posture so that the middle of the tongue is higher. And then when they articulate certain sounds, particularly high front sounds, they'll tend to push this up in order to help support the front of the tongue. We don't do that. Okay. The K, if I go because the back of the tongue is living, it is living. Because it's lifting, I actually feel that the 3 particularly, you'll usually feel it back through this part, not necessarily up here, because this is like connected through the root into the back. But I do feel this part, it's not pushing up, but it's sort of being pulled up as this lifts. And that's fine. As long as you don't push up, you can kind of hold it down if you want it. I can keep it there. It's not really a big deal, but this, just don't make it tight. Don't push up. You're fine. Okay. You have a couple options of what to do there. We don't really have to care too much about the 3 as long as you're not activating your posture. The 5. Okay. So again, this was our 5 area. So every sound, you're going to have at least a little bit of resistance. Depends on where the sound is, what it's doing, how tight it is. So our center of gravity is going to resist. As we were talking about earlier, the front of the 5 is going to, or the front of the back of the tongue is going to resist. The back of the tongue is going to resist. This is super important. The higher you go here, the more you're going to have to resist here because it wants to pull it up. Even if you're not pushing up or you're not pushed forward, it's going to want to pull it up. And so you sort of dig in a little bit. You just lock it in. Not that big of a deal. It's a little weird to get used to at first, but not that big of a deal. So again, that middle's coming up, sort of, it's objectively going to be kind of like this, but the tension here is going to be this way while the tension here is pushing this way. I had a question about that from a student the other day. They're like, how do I do that? Just lock these two pieces together, resist, okay, against the pull. So then you're balanced. It's not that you're like, you can't bring that up at all. It's going to kind of come up, but you're not letting the whole thing push up. You're trying to resist here while this is coming up. That'll help stabilize the posture. Okay. Very important here, very important in the center of gravity in particular. We got to keep the center of gravity in place because again, it's going to pull on it, try to pull these pieces up. We don't want that. Okay, so you add 5 resistance. Now, do you need a lot of resistance? No. Back of tongue sounds generally, as a rule, with the exception of and ul, do not need a lot of resistance. Also, W is pretty high and tight. But the K, it can kind of lean on the top here, so you don't have to have a whole lot of tension to hold it up there. It just kind of hangs off of there a little bit. But compared to a lot of these high front sounds, you really don't need much for most of the back sounds here. If we give a scale, which we can do a scale, I do that in my classes sometimes. This would be like 100% resistance. This would be 0% resistance, which would be that's your 0 setting. And then we have like 50% resistance. You can actually plot this out visually. You can say as you go from the K to the A to the T, right? K would be maybe like here. It's like 10, 20% resistance, whatever. It's not that much. It doesn't really matter the exact percentage. It's a low number. It doesn't really matter. And then we say, okay, well, if we go to as we'll learn, is actually one of the 2 tightest sounds, excluding the and the dark L. Those are also really tight, but those are special. Those are sort of at the end. Among all of our basic regular monophthongs and diphthongs that don't include R's and L's, A and as in book are the 2 tightest sounds in the language. And so I would actually put the R and the L maybe off of the scale a little bit. They would be 100 or maybe more, depending. I haven't completely thought about that relationship because I don't always use the scale with people, but A would be like 100%. Okay. And then as you go to T, T is high in the front. And so you actually need quite a bit in the 5 as well. And so it wouldn't be as much, but we'd say maybe it kind of comes down to here-ish, somewhere around like 80-ish percent or so, 70 to 80%. Okay. So you can actually see the resistance in the 5. This is just for the 5, right? Just for the 5. It doesn't apply the same to every piece. That's one of the unfortunate things because it depends on what the sound is doing. You don't have to add the same amount of resistance here and here as you would here. It depends on what the sound is trying to do, right? But the 5 always will have resistance. Sometimes other pieces don't have resistance unless you're doing that's your 0. But you can see if I go I get a lot more in the 5, and then as I go to the T, this comes up, and then I get a little less, but it's still quite a lot. Cat. If I go back to after that, I would go back to 0, and you can feel the release of this back down to here. Again, these are frameworks, they're concepts. They don't necessarily have to be pinpoint accurate. They give you an idea of what to do. Let's see. What do we have? Is it okay if the front gets engaged in? Okay, so yeah, we were talking about that. So to answer that then, because that was one of the questions, right? The general rule is whatever part of the tongue you're using to create the sound is the only part of the tongue that's engaged. Now, it is possible to preload and overlap sounds depending. So, like if you have a front tongue sound, say it's a T, and then back here you have like an O or an like took, right? I can already be in the while I'm lifting up into the T. I'm overlapping those two sounds so that when the T comes down, the is already there. That's preloading. That's what I call preloading the vowel sound. That's fine. That can happen. You don't have to do that. You can just be right. If you're not preloading anything, then it's just underneath. It's just basic posture. You just sort of add some resistance for it, but it's basically the is underneath everything. So if I would lift up here from my T, bam, I can be in my basic posture underneath. And then as I release the T, I can shift into the okay. That's another way to do it. It doesn't matter. If you listen to natives, you'll hear both versions sometimes. If you really listen, sometimes you'll hear if I go T and preload the t, you can sort of hear it in the breath. T, t, took. Is already there. Or I could say something, it's not going to be tuck because there's not an in it. But if you have the basic posture underneath and you start going off the T, you start moving up into the you're going to hear maybe a little bit of an in between, like a tiny baby, like little schwa type sound. You can really hear it in the breath there. Took. By the time I add the voice, I'm already moving too much into the you won't really hear the A good example of trying to hear that or that in between, if you say on, right? So the preposition on. I'm not doing on as like 3 separate sounds, but as I transition from the here and lift this, the sound is sort of shifting through the center of gravity up into the N. And then, of course, as I lift more here, I'm digging in more here. So it's always a counterbalance, right? I know this is a lot for a lot of you. Like, what are we talking about? The course is not this messy. I promise you, it's not this messy. I'm just trying to give you guys a simple example without the structure of the course. It would be very step by step. Okay. Like this wouldn't even be a day one word. This would be like, we would have like 4 or 5 lessons before we get to a word like this, at least, because we want to talk about the basic pieces and start building them in with a couple basic sounds first. Anyway, so yeah, unless you're preloading the vowel, no. So if I'm doing the K, if I'm not preloading, say, an E or something, this is just going to be down where it normally is. Okay. It's just regular posture. So the answer is you can maybe, like if the front of the tongue, or is it okay if the front of the tongue gets engaged when lifting the back? Only if the next sound, the vowel or whatever the consonant would be like, you can also, that's, the S can sort of be there as you release the K, it just comes out. It's a good way to link it better. Okay. But if the next sound is in the front of the mouth, then yes, you can engage the front while you're lifting the back. If the next sound is not in the front of the mouth, then no, you cannot do that. Okay. That would be breaking posture. Anyway, let's clean this up a little bit. Things, what am I deleting? Oh, okay. Yeah, we can clean that up. Okay. So that's the 5, right? You add your resistance to the 5. And then in the root, notice this is all just still the K sound. This seems like a lot for just one sound, but we learn this step by step as we go, right? It's not so overwhelming necessarily. The root is down here. This is the root of the tongue. What I currently call in the 11. Might switch it to the 10 because I might make this no longer the 10. That's a different thing for a different time, but this is the root of the tongue. It's the 11th piece. Notice I'm skipping. I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11. Why did I do that? Well, the 7 we don't usually have to worry about. If you say cat and you sound nasal, you say can't or something like that, then we have to worry about the 7. Usually we don't have to. This is the 8, right? Generally this area can kind of extend down a bit. This is the 8. A lot of the time with the way that I currently teach it, we don't have problems in the 8. We don't have to worry about it. If you have a problem there, you're saying like cat or something like that, and it's really tight here, we might have to address that. 9, once our 9 is in place, we shift that line down here like I was talking about in a previous video for shifting your posture. That just kind of stays there. You may or may not have to add some resistance for some sounds. Usually I don't feel I have to add much there. This usually is not a problem with the way I currently teach it. And then of course, this stays open, stays low. That's the throat setting. We're still breathing. Okay, the breath is underneath all of this. So a lot of the other numbers, and the 6, of course, the 6 is here. Don't push in here. That's sometimes a problem where you end up pushing in there. We have to maybe address that. Otherwise, don't worry about it. So 6, 7, 8, 9, we generally don't have to worry too much about unless you're causing some sort of problem with how you're trying to do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, really not even the 4, mostly the 3. So 1, 2, 3, 5, and 11. Those are like the biggest things that we need, with the 5 and 11 being biggest for stabilizing. 1, 2, and 3 is for like keeping your middle shape and making sure that the middle stays low. Otherwise, if you're in place, you're in place. That's good. But what does the 11 do in our K sound? Well, the general pattern, broadly speaking, if you have a sound up here, the root will resist this way. Remember, the root should already be at 0 setting, should already be down and back, not pinched, not narrow, not tight. It's just sort of hanging into the throat a little bit. So that's your 0. From that 0, you resist a little down in the back. So if you do a T, you do an E, you do an A, you do an A. Depends on the exact sound and how it's trying to pull the root this way, of how much you'll have to resist that. Generally, the higher it is, the more resistance you need. Back of tongue sounds, it's not really pulling on it, forward. So I can sort of anchor down and back a little bit, but I feel mostly like it's like 80 to 90% just down. Okay. Provided again that you start in the right spot. Don't get tight with it. But so what this would do is, as I go up for the K on the middle of the back, the root will feel like it's doing this a little bit. And so you actually sort of feel like you're stretching these two parts of the tongue. So if I transition and I go, I can kind of feel a little bit, it's not like a crazy thing, but I feel a little bit of like an opposite pull between the top and the bottom of the tongue in the back there. Again, this is trying to stay in place. This is trying to stay in place. This is resisting. That's trying to work with the root, but this part will push up through. Okay, you're using sort of this part of the muscle. So that's the K. That's all you need to know for the K. You just practice that, go in and out of the get good at it. Okay, let's pretend that you have your K sound. You can do that just fine. Then you have your A, then you have your T, right? And we can go and talk about all those examples. Let me get to some questions or all the details for these. Unless you guys are getting bored, you can tell me. But I'm going to get to some of the questions here first. Sam the Chipmunk, hello. Belated, sorry. I saw that a little while ago. You know how my brain works. If you're used to my live streams, I try to go in order. Might be the autism that I likely have. Don't tell RFK because, he wants to put people on a list. Once all this craziness is done, I'll get tested for it. But for the K sound, is it that in a sagittal view, like the map shown? Thank you for that. The contact surface area is small, but if you look at it from the front, the seal is wide, making a complete view. Okay. The contact surface area is small. Okay, so yeah, so I was talking about like as you lift, you touch with like the least surface area possible. But then, okay, so if we're looking from the side, you see like, okay, it's like a little bit. But then if you were to look from the front, yeah, so that's actually another little tiny detail to the K that sometimes I have to tell people, like especially Russian speakers really benefit from this. I've noticed it depends on who I'm talking to. For some reason, Russian speakers really this really helps them a lot. Um, there's we have three dimensions when we're talking about articulation and posture. So there's width, there's height, and there's what would technically be called backness, right? So width would be narrow versus wide, height is up versus down, obviously, and then backness would be forward versus back. Um, these are not terms that I created. I'm pretty sure that the term backness and height are in the literature. I don't know if they talk much about width, but that is another dimension that I found very useful. We already see our 2 gets nice and wide, our 4 gets nice and wide, right? We're not pinching, we're not tightening. Okay, so when we talk about the articulation of sounds, also the 11, you don't want to pinch, that gets a little wide, right? We're talking about the articulation of sounds, particularly the T and the K, well, ta da na and then ka ga nga. Um, there is a little bit of a width component that we can mess with. So we do want a solid seal. So in the T, it's going to sort of, seal all along here. In the K, it's going to seal all along back here. And you can say if you're doing a T, you can like slightly try to get a little bit of width in the front there, sort of like, space that tongue out. And that's going to give you a slightly different T than if you were to not to do that, or versus if you were to sort of like pinch it in around the tip where or not the tips, not the, but it's the blade there, around where that T is, you're going to get a slightly different thing. So if I go sort of like a wider T, 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 t. If I do sort of a medium T, 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 t. If I do sort of a more like pinched around the blade area, t, t, t. We actually see that it gets a little crisper as I go from wider to narrow. And so it's the same with the K. So if you could look in the front of your mouth and you say, okay, I'm going to lift up for a K, you'll see that the front of your tongue is low, the middle of your tongue is low. Okay, again, it's not being pulled up with the K. The back of the tongue is going to be high. And lost my thought there. Yeah. And so it would look like if I'm looking in this way, it would look like the tongue's doing this on the back. It's like creating a full seal along the top of the mouth. So it's as little surface area as possible, but you still have to make a full seal so that the air doesn't come through, right? So it would look quite wide. Now I can also modify that. There's just a basic full seal, but then I can sort of widen it more. I can go like k, k. That actually tends to be what a lot of Russian speakers do, or something similar to that, because they tend to have a wider back of tongue, in my experience. I'm not an expert on that; just that's based on my experience. If I go sort of more of a neutral width, I go k, k, k. That sounds fine. If I sort of squeeze it, k, k, k. Again, it makes it crisper. Now, this is not posture. This is articulation. Okay, you do not want, just like you don't want to pinch and grab that, you don't want to pinch and grab this either. Do not do that. It's going to cause problems. This is not posture. I'm talking about the articulation of the sound. Right where the sound is, I'm sort of squeezing it in there. Right where the sound is on the T, I'm squeezing it in there. Posture is separate from that. If you squeeze your posture, even if I have everything else correct, but I squeeze that 5 in the, like, say back here, let's see, k, 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 k. I get a similar type of sound, but it immediately sounds tighter. It sounds more closed. You can't be doing that. Okay. So the posture needs to stay kind of, relaxed, wide on the wider end, and not pinching it, not tight. Okay. Particularly in the back of the back here. But then where you're pushing the sound, where you're putting the sound itself, you can squeeze that area and narrow it just right there and get a little bit of a crisper sound. So crispness, in my experience at least, seems to be partially created by how sort of tight you're squeezing that piece when you're doing the k and the t. Same thing with the d and the g. N and ng don't really get affected by that very much because they go through the nose. So that's fine. But then where I was saying a little surface area is possible, same thing in the T here. If you're too flat, even though I'm not touching my teeth, it sounds like a dental D or a dental T. If I'm back here and I use too much surface area, I'm too flat, like see, creates a little bit of a different K sound. So they're all T's, they're all K's, right? But they're different quality. And that quality is created by a mix of having the right posture and having the right articulation details, right? So crispness would be a combination of as little surface area as possible plus squeezing, you know, inward narrowing on the sound. Where if you want sort of a flatter, softer type of T or K or whatever, then you would actually widen it, and it would take a completely different quality. Anyway, so we're seeing how the width can affect not just the posture, but the articulation of a particular sound. Again, that's most relevant in the T, D, K, and the Kanga. But we always have these three dimensions at work in the posture and in the articulation. Like say even the E is not touching, but I can sort of try to narrow or widen that area, and I will get a slightly different quality of the E based on where the E is placed, which is sort of like around here-ish. Okay. I need some more questions here. Hopefully that answers your question, Matan. And as you lift the back of the tongue, do you keep touching the very back tooth at the same place, or do you slide the anchor as the tongue rises? So again, right, we generally don't want to be moving forward and back very much. There's wiggle room. That's fine. Again, the K wants to pull things this way. So I can feel, say, around that, because remember, I'm anchored fourth, fifth, sixth in the middle. I can feel a very slight pull. It doesn't come off, it doesn't slide, it doesn't move or anything, but I feel a little bit of tension wanting to start kind of almost pulling that part of the tongue on the fourth tooth. So you can feel a little bit of backward pull in that area, but if you're resisting right and keeping everything into place, it won't actually move. You're just feeling a little tug from the creation of the K. If we're talking about the back teeth, so again, this is getting messy. The sixth tooth, this looks like, sorry, that's the 5. This is where the sixth tooth would be. This isn't the number 6, the sixth tooth, right? That's about where your center of gravity should be roughly. Then you have like your 7th tooth here. And then if you have your wisdom teeth, that should be the 8th teeth all the way, or 8th tooth in the back. So generally speaking, you kind of want to be along the 7th tooth. And that's not going to change much. So, because remember, that's one of our lines. We don't want to be moving too far forward and back. There's wiggle room, especially depending on like what sounds you're coming from and going to. It's not static. It's like water. Kind of does this a little bit, but it's mostly this way and not so much this way. All right. There's just a little bit of forward and back, mostly up and down. Trust me, you're gonna have a much cleaner experience if you do that. And to clarify, I don't know if I mentioned this last stream, I might have. 95% of what I tell you guys is just how it is. Like this is just bam, done. Like if you want to sound American, that's how it is. About 5% of the details I tell you guys are things that you don't necessarily have to do it exactly that way. Or there might be like a little more wiggle room than I say there is. If you have complete control over the posture, like a native would. So you might ask a native like, hey, this teacher said that, if I do this particular word or sound or whatever, like it should be like this. And of course, the average person doesn't have that feeling, but let's say they're a little experienced. Maybe they speak a couple languages, they have good pronunciation, whatever. And you go to them and you're like, hey, like, is this true? Like, do you as a native, like, do you do that? And they might say like, no, that person's wrong. Okay. Like it doesn't feel that way to me. And that's why I try to qualify to you guys like, hey, I'm a native speaker. This is how it feels to me. I have a neutral accent. So this is at least one way to do it. But because there's a little bit of wiggle room in the exact settings, there's a little bit of wiggle room in the exact articulations, without sounding like you're regional, right? People might do things slightly differently, but the differences are going to be so small that it doesn't really matter. Like it's not detectable for the most part, unless you really zoom in and break things down, like maybe with like some sort of scientific instrument or a really good ear, maybe you can hear a more subtle difference. So 5% of the things I tell you guys is more based off of either just how I do it and or more importantly, things that I have learned in the course of teaching this that help you avoid mistakes, help you avoid problems like breaking your posture. Okay. That's one reason why I say that that upside down V sound, like you don't need that sound, period. That has nothing to do with posture, has nothing to do with me. I use that sound. Um, Most, I would say all natives probably do, but we hear it and use it as an extension of the I've talked about that before. You can go watch those lessons of the truth about the schwa. Um, and because it's not necessary, I've tested it extensively. It's not necessary to do that sound and still sound like a natural native speaker. Um, we don't learn it. That's one reason we don't learn it. But the other reason we don't learn it is because of due to where it is and the fact that the jaw tends to open with it, it's sort of uniquely situated to break your posture. It wants to activate your posture. And I kept running into that problem early in the course development. And I said, okay, let's see if we can actually just not do that sound, see if you sound good. People were still sounding good. Let's not do that. And then people stopped breaking their posture. So you could do the upside down V sound, but I say, hey, don't do it, ignore it. You don't need it. You can follow my advice. If you want to do it, learn how to do it while keeping the posture, but you can just make your life easier and avoid it. So that goes in that sort of 5%, right? Where you have like, there's technically, the reality is more complicated. But I'm trying to help you avoid common problems, right? Okay. Anyway, to finish answering this question, I know I'm terrible. You're going to generally feel like if you're in or you're in ka, whatever teeth you're feeling, you're going to feel pretty much the same thing. I can feel maybe a little bit more because it's trying to lift. I can feel the sides of the back maybe kind of get pushed into the corners of like the seventh tooth or whatever back there. That's fine. Like, not really a problem because it's trying to stay down, but middle's coming up. So, you know, just like if I lift the front, you might feel a little bit more push into that fourth tooth. That's a stabilizer for the front of the tongue, but it also makes sense that if you're lifting the front, you're probably going to feel the fourth tooth a little bit more. Okay. So don't really let it slide around. You can feel some movement, you can feel a little wiggling, whatever, but you shouldn't be, it shouldn't be sliding around. If you do something like ka to a, you can maybe feel a little bit as it comes off, but it's not going to be moving. It's going to feel sort of like it's sliding off or unzipping. It's not really going to actually be like sliding anywhere, unless you do that really forward that some teachers teach you, which you don't have to do. A complete seal. Yeah. Okay. In the 11-step process, number 6 is located in the Adam's apple and 9 is the vocal cords. No, absolutely wrong. So Adam's apple and vocal cords are in the throat system. Okay. Everything above this purple line is posture. Everything below this purple line is essentially breathing, but we have to talk about the throat. That's the pipes that the breath flows through. So the 9 is here. Okay. Your vocal cords would be more like here. Okay. We don't see the entire throat here. This is roughly like the middle of the throat area. Your vocal cords are kind of in here. This, we can see this is the Adam's apple right there. Right? That's the top of the Adam's apple at least. So those are in the throat system. The 6 is here. So when we're talking about the 6 and the 9, the 6 would be like, you have this, you have your seatbelt here with your jaw, and then you get to this sort of curve. The Adam's apple is right there underneath the curve. If you push into the curve above the Adam's apple, it's kind of hard to feel it exactly, but you're going to feel right here. That's the 6. And a lot of languages just push that up. We don't want to do that. So the 6 is in here. You can't actually really touch it very well. You can sort of touch the edge of it, the outer part of it, but it's up in there. And then the 9 would be like up in there, like sort of maybe between like your jaw bones would roughly be something kind of like that maybe. Okay, so the 9 is going to kind of be underneath in that, around the jaw area, you know what I mean, where the jaw attaches. Something kind of like that, right? So yeah, Adam's apple, you do not want to mess with the Adam's apple itself, because the middle throat is going to come out, and then the sides of the middle are going to come down, and that's going to help us shift everything lower and allow this to come down lower. But you don't really want to mess with the top of the throat. And if you directly try to lower the Adam's apple itself instead of just pushing the middle out, which will visually lower the Adam's apple, but if you lower the Adam's apple itself, you're gonna probably change your pitch. You might get a bit weird voice. What I feel if I try to go from like a higher posture like Spanish back into my posture, it actually feels like this area. And this is probably because I'm not a native speaker of Spanish. So I don't know how that area should feel. Maybe I'm not changing it right, but I don't really change this area particularly. It'll get pushed into as I like tighten this up and push into here and stuff. So it does get kind of affected. But this area itself, it almost feels like if I'm trying to do Spanish and I'm trying to lift my nine like that, I'll feel like the relationship is like, oh, it's here. And then as I try to lower that line and open up more, I'll feel like, oh, it's here. And then as I get fully down into my posture, it's like, oh, it's here. So it's almost like as I go from higher to lower, it's almost like a fulcrum where the top of the throat, we just kind of move around the top of the throat. And it does sort of get affected to some degree, yes, but um, in my experience, if you shift into American English posture from most other postures, your pitch will get a little bit lower, but not unnaturally low. So there is going to be some slight effect in this area, but it's not going to be very drastic. And that's actually a big danger point that if you start sounding artificially low or you start having a weird voice or something, you're messing with this area in a way that you shouldn't be messing with it. That's where all the pitch mechanics are. So, uh, it can be a little bit of a trick to figure out how to lower everything without worrying too much about that. This will sort of come a little bit low, maybe get a little relaxed, and so your pitch will get a little low, but then underneath that, that also needs to sort of like open up more. You don't really want to mess with this area too much. That's a general guideline. It depends a little bit on the language, it depends on the person. Um, the details of this, I'm not an expert on. I just know that when I tell people to change things, things happen, and then when I tell them to fix it, problems go away. So I don't know like every little muscle and all that other stuff. Like I'm not an anatomy expert. Um, you generally want the Christmas for those sounds, those stop sounds in American English, right? Yes. We need particularly the T and the K, the T and the K. They need to be very very crisp. Um, there's a little bit of a range, and we can get kind of lazy. Obviously, the voiced sounds, because of the voice, you won't hear the breath as much, and they won't sound as crisp necessarily. But we're still using the same mechanics. We want it to be sort of like a sort of strong kind of tight sound, where if I do like say a flatter T, the, if I do a flatter D, the, they sound very similar when we do them like in a sort of flatter or more dental way. Where if I do duh, you can still hear like the D doesn't have the like the full crispness because the voice is sort of like the breath isn't coming out the same way due to the voice. Um, but it still sounds sort of harder and crisper in a way. If I go for like a flat D, the. If I do more of a sharp D, duh, duh, duh. So you can still hear a quality difference there. It's just that the T's and the D's sound more clearly like different. Where in the flatter ones they almost sound the same, at least to my ear. I assume like if you're a Spanish speaker and you have uh, like an actual dental T or D, maybe you hear a greater difference between the T and the D. Like I hear a difference, but compared to the English ones, it's a smaller difference. So anyway, good. We got up on questions. Yeah. So let's move into the unless you guys have, you're bored. We can shift into something else. But a lot of this was for the K. Let me clean this up because this is a gigantic mess, and I might have to reload my file because I can only go back so much. Okay, that's enough. That works. That's fine. Okay. So we're done with the K. Let's go to the A. A is a problem child. The good news is usually the way that I teach the A, especially now that I know about the posture and how to resist it and all that stuff, it solves a lot of the problems that English learners tend to run into. there's a group of sounds. I might have talked about this last time. I don't remember, but let me do this like this. As in book. That's how I write the I always transcribe it the same. This is my system. If you don't like it, go use IPA. As in cat. So as in it, bit, right? As in cat or bat or at. As in book or took. The O tends to kind of be in that group just because it's not a static sound. You have to figure out how to move it, which I do have an easier way to do that, as I've talked about in a couple different lessons. Ow. Okay. Ow is in my opinion, it's mechanically the most complex and difficult sound to do because of all the pieces that are involved. So yeah, this is generally the list. Of course, also like the L's, particularly the dark L, you can say dark L, and then the that's sort of our tier 2, tier 3 type sounds that we hold off until the very last section of the course. But of our basic sounds, our regular sound group, these sounds are just on a list where I've noticed that it doesn't really matter who I'm working with. It doesn't matter what their language is. It doesn't matter how advanced or not they are, how big their accent or how small their accent. In general, these sounds in particular, I forgot to add the T and the D. Yeah, the T and the D. For some weird reason, the T and the D as well. These sounds tend to just take longer. They just take longer. So we learn E, I, the forefront vowels pretty early in the course. It's like within our first group of vowels, more or less. And people will, usually E is just a posture issue. Is sometimes they get it confused with like the start of A in American English. Usually isn't too bad, but then the I and the A, with the way I currently teach it, it doesn't take as long, thankfully, but it always seems like no matter how good my approach is, these sounds will just take longer. So your E and your E will probably be perfect or near perfect long before your I and your A are perfect or near perfect. They just take longer to master. And that's okay. That's okay, right? You just keep working on the side, et cetera, et cetera. We keep testing it. We have different things that we do through the course to try to make sure we're touching up on that. You just get better at it over time. Okay. So keep that in mind, right? If you're struggling with a particular sound and it's on this list, you're not alone. That's common. That's normal. That's expected. But if we talk about the A is one of these problem children. The reason why A is so difficult is because we need to know exactly where it is. We need to know exactly how we're trying to produce it, and we need to know what the posture is doing in response. I've been really struggling with voice production, like where the voice vibrates or resonates. So I have a question about voice placement. Sorry. That's perfectly fine. Yeah, well, we can talk about that. I'm kind of all over the place, and I'm sorry for people who were just like, talk about this word. Sorry. I'm a chaotic thing. All right. I'm a chaotic creature. This is what happens when you interact with me live. All right. I blame the ADHD. Yes, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, autism, and ADHD, not diagnosed. So I don't want to say anything, but I need medication. I know that much. I definitely need medication. Resonance means vibration and tension means tightness. Americans tend to shift attention to the stomach, so there's no tension, tightness in the whole throat, but there's a resonance, vibration in the bottom of the throat, or maybe in the upper chest. Yeah, okay, so we can go on to a little tangent for that. That is relevant because it's not directly relevant to the sound of to the posture, but it is relevant because these things need to be underneath the sounds in the posture. So it's all connected, right? That's my excuse. I wish this were cold. Sorry, that's Tanya's ADHD. Thanks. Really struggling with voice production. Like, okay. So the basic system there, um, there's resonance in the mouth and there's resonance through the throat area, we'll say. Um, and the way that I used to teach this, especially if you've seen like that Joker video, I have a couple like different details and ways that I approach it that I found are kind of less confusing and more efficient for most people. Not that anything is necessarily different. Um, I'm just like I'm always testing things and trying to find like new and better ways to present things that work for most people. Um, so the way that I currently explain it would be like this. Okay. So we have our breath system. We talked about the breath system. I'm not going to go over all that again, but you breathe in with the diaphragm, not with the chest. Suck that air into the body. Okay. You lift your car, you get your power in your stomach, but you keep this open. Okay. You're going to squeeze the diaphragm. So as the diaphragm pulls the air in, it's doing this, but it's kind of also doing this. And it's better to think of it this way, actually, rather than doing this. So as you breathe in, you expand. Okay. And then when you breathe out, when you're speaking, you're sort of squeezing it in like this. That tends to work better for people than trying to squeeze it like, like do this way. It just works better for most people. I don't know why. But you squeeze the diaphragm in as you're trying to blow out the candles. That's the last step. You get a nice, good, powerful breath. Okay. It's a little exaggerated, but it gives you a good base. Tone it back a little bit when you're speaking. Okay. So if I say, also gives you nice volume. You can modify things as you need. That's the basic breathing mechanics. Why am I talking about that when we're asking about placement and stuff? Because it's directly relevant. Um, Secondarily, right, as I said, we have our system 2 is down here in the breath, the diaphragm and all that. System 1.5 that links the posture, which is system 1 down to system 2, is the throat area. We already said that we don't want to mess too much with the top of the throat. Middle of the throat is going to come out. The sides of it are going to come down, lock in towards the bottom. They're going to sort of tense down. And then that allows us to have a more open, sort of wider and lower setting. Now, working in conjunction with the breath to some extent indirectly, right? Because since we're pulling everything down with the diaphragm, everything is sort of locking in lower because our posture is lower, our throat is sort of at a lower setting. And you can sort of conceptually, it's not necessarily because of this, but conceptually you can think like, well, because the diaphragm is pulling everything down, it all comes down. And so in that way, it's kind of linked, right? Okay. So a lot of languages, they'll have their sort of voice placement in the throat up here, right? Because everything's higher and tighter. Like they don't use as much breath. So things kind of just resonate around here. And then in the mouth, the voice placement tends to kind of be more towards the front or maybe a little bit in the middle. So like Spanish, for example, the mouth global resonance is up in the front. American English, what does American English do? Well, we know that we're getting lower, we're coming back, we're opening up, right? We're getting wider. This is coming down. We're using more breath. The breath is flowing out of the mouth. Okay. And so because we have more space in the mouth, that resonance chamber is getting larger and it's sort of pulling back and widening. And so there's a lot more space than, say, like in Spanish or in Japanese, where things are sort of squeezed and sort of pushed forward from the root, sometimes to some extent, usually from the 8. Here, right, we talked about our 9 is pushed up. Right, this tends to be pushed in, this tends to be pushed in, this tends to be pushed up. So everything sort of gets higher and tighter and squeezed, and that will actually shrink the space that you have in the mouth, shrink some of the space you have in the throat, and that'll push your local resonance in the mouth up here. So you're always kind of vibrating up here. And then there's local resonance wherever the sound is. In American English, our global resonance that we always have in the mouth, don't worry, I'm going to come back to the throat, is here because we're lower, we have more space, so that resonance gets to travel to the back of the mouth, and then we're always vibrating. If I do a sound in the front, I have local resonance, E, I can feel vibration there. I feel vibration there. It's kind of through the nose more, but there's always, no matter what sound I'm doing, there's always vibration in the back of the mouth because the back of the tongue is low, right? Now, even if the back tongue gets kind of high, okay, it's going to slightly alter that space there, but because everything here is really open, everything here is really low, the mouth resonance is still going to generally vibrate here. And then the local resonance for the sound is also generating here. So that's why like our ooh, or especially our W, can sound so sort of like deep. Ooh, ooh. We have lots of space here. We have lots of space back here. We still have lots of space down here. So even if this space gets squeezed a bit by an ooh or a W, there's still lots of space for that deeper resonance to happen, right? Okay. In the throat, what happens because our 9 is now down here and this is open, this is coming down. Well, that's going to take the throat voice placement. Okay. Most languages have it around here. Something kind of like that. It's like the same sound basically. I'm just kind of trying to like modify this area. Um, it'll have an effect on that, right? As I said, like the top of the throat does sort of get a little bit modified. There'll be a little bit of a pitch change, but I'm not just trying to change my pitch. I'm not going right? Um, but because we're lowering, we're opening, we're letting all that breath come through, that will shift the vibration that's in the throat here down here. Again, we're pushing this down, we're opening this up, just like in the mouth where it gets squeezed up here in some languages, but then American English opens up and it comes back here. Same thing kind of happens in the throat. Instead of it being squeezed up here, as we open up and push down on the sides here to lock into the bottom, it's actually going to drift lower because we have more space. Okay, there's nothing pushing it up and squeezing it. Now, most of you guys already know I say don't speak from the chest. Okay. That's what Rachel's English talks about. I generally agree with most things that she talks about. And thinking of speaking from the chest can help you get the right result, at least through here. It's not going to fix your posture. It can help your posture and it'll help you make you sound a bit better. But it's sort of just one piece. It's an indirect solution. It doesn't actually help your posture directly. So she's not wrong necessarily, but in my opinion, no native speaker speaks from the chest naturally. Like we can go into the chest for various reasons and at various times. It's not like we never use the chest. It's usually more of like a projection thing. If you're on stage. That being said, because the vocal cords are vibrating here, again, depending on how I hold and tighten the throat, the primary vibration, you might feel a little higher, you might feel a little lower. Because everything's opening up and coming down, the voice and throat placement tend to be down here more. It's more at the bottom of the throat. So I talked about, I believe, in the Joker video. But I can still feel vibration in my chest. I'm just not vibrating from the chest. It's sort of like it's emanating. I can feel vibration coming up through here. I feel vibration coming down through here, all the way down into my stomach. But even my stomach, if I put my hand right here and I pay attention, I say, yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying whatever. It's faint. It's easier if I kind of hold like the sound or something. But I can feel a little bit of vibration in my stomach. Okay. If you don't feel vibration in your stomach, you're probably not doing it quite right. Okay. But you will feel some vibration in your chest, just not coming primarily from the chest. Okay. The vocal cords are going to vocal cord, as we like to make nouns into verbs these days. Vocal cords are going to do what they do. They're going to vibrate. That's just basic anatomy. It doesn't matter what your posture is. It doesn't matter whatever. The vocal cords are here, and they're just going to vibrate. That's what they do. But depending on how you hold the tension of the throat, how you hold the tension of the mouth, indirectly, that can kind of pull things up. Especially the root. If your root's tight, you can actually pull this up into it a bit. That's a common problem. And depending on how you're breathing, right? If you have this sort of nice, low, full breath with the diaphragm, or if you have this sort of like more shallower chest type breathing, that tends to go with this higher tension. So depending on the tension and the space we create, that's going to shift that voice placement. Okay. The vocal cords are just doing their thing regardless. Your vocal cords are just here in Spanish, in English, Mandarin, Japanese, Turkish, German, whatever. It doesn't matter the language. Your vocal cords are just doing their physical thing that they're vibrating. It depends on how you hold the space and how you tense things. Okay, that's what shifts it. What I have found to tie that off is through the development of the course, I tried to tackle a lot of these, especially like, hey, this is like our voice and breath control area, which I still would say it is. But I don't, these days, especially with like newer students, I don't even mention that. Like, I don't even say that. There's a couple times that I've had a student that had like some extra difficulty where I sort of like mentioned that we had like tackled it directly and it helped. But with the way that I'm currently teaching it with like the breath system, especially once I got the breath figured out, I'm like, okay, this is working. This is the foundation that's going to help the posture come down and open up. And it solves, when you start from the breath first, it solves a lot of problems that you would otherwise run into. So I find that I don't really have to talk about where is the resonance so much anymore. It can be useful depending on how the student is sounding or whatever. You kind of need like some sort of feedback in ear for that. But if you start with the breath properly and you have your throat setting properly, you generally don't have to worry too much about finding the right voice placement. It will tend to kind of take care of itself. And then you just make sure that your root, make sure your nine is in place. Where's my mouse? Come on, mouse. Make sure it's lagging. Why am I lagging? Okay. Make sure your 9 is in place, and then make sure that your root is in place, because if this is tight or you're pushing up through here, if your 6 is being pushed into, anything through this area that's being pushed up or in or being squeezed, that can shrink the space through here. That can sort of, modify things. It can pull things up underneath it. You don't want to do any of that. So, although we have system 2 and system 1.5, and those are sort of underneath the posture itself can pull those up or modify them in a way that we don't want. So, you do need everything working together, right? Um, and it's this low area here in the posture, the 11, the 6, and the 9, that sort of help us link into that proper setting. So you don't want to be fighting against yourself, right? So at the end of the day, I say, hey, there's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 11, and then there's the throat and there's the breath, and it all has to work together. And I'm sorry that there's so many pieces. um, I didn't make it. Okay. You can identify probably all of the same pieces in your language. They're probably going to look a little different. If we talk about the 1 and the 2 in your language, it's probably going to be high and flat, or maybe it's even rounded the other way. Who knows, right? Maybe you have like a different piece. Maybe you have a piece here that would be logical to sort of break off and be like, yeah, this piece is kind of important because we tend to like do something with it, to stabilize posture. I don't know. This is specific to American English. All the details are probably not completely transferable, but generally, when we talk about doing these things, the more that people adjust the way that I tell them to, the more their accent goes away, right? So regardless of wherever you're starting, if you follow this path and get all the pieces working together, little by little, we do it step by step in the course as we learn new sounds, little by little, look at sentences little by little, it starts to stabilize. You get very familiar with it. Next thing you know, your accent is disappearing. There is a difference between, like, some of it is going to flow into your speech. Not all of it will flow into your speech. You're going to be able to consciously say things really, really well, but there is a little bit of bridge work that we usually have to do to kind of get it fully into your speech. I have a couple students that I'm doing that with right now. Destino lugubre. I don't know what that means. I don't know what destino means. Hi, sorry. I take forever to respond to people. But Sam the Chipmunk, hopefully that answers your question in my typical long-winded fashion. It's already 2:04, guys. It's 2:04. Why? Let me check something. italki. This is my italki teacher profile. Shameless promotion. I'm checking when my class is. This person, 4:15 to 5:15. Okay. We're going to come back over here. So I have a couple hours. I don't necessarily want to take the entire time that I have, but where'd the chat go? But yeah, we'll at least try to get through this word, if nothing else. If you have other questions, feel free to let me know. That's fine. Preferably related to posture, but if it's related to something else, we will probably still be able to talk about that. I just won't have that as a priority. Okay, so the ah sound. Yes, finally, the long-awaited ah sound after me talking about like 20 minutes about something not even about the ah sound. Everything I just talked about, you have to have in the ah sound. This is still there. Your breathing is still there. We just take that for granted. That's underneath the posture. Okay, and we have to resist in the posture to make sure that we don't, pull this up because our 11 got tight because of the ah or whatever it is, right? Again, it's all connected, but these just work the way that they work and everything else. Where's the ah? Okay, so we're gonna have this nice, cool little staircase. Again, this area of the map visually is not a one-to-one scale replica. In general, it's not, but particularly this area, it gives you an idea. I don't know the exact proportional size of this tooth. So this would be like the third tooth. This would be like the second tooth. I don't know. And then your first tooth. Now I have a big gap. See, I don't know. I'm just trying to point out this is the fourth tooth. Okay. So when we talk about where the sounds are for the front vowels here, it's not exactly a one-to-one. Keep that in mind. But roughly speaking, okay, cool thing, there are no vowels on the front half of the front, with the exception of the start of A. That is on the blade. There's no sounds on the tip, except maybe you could say the TH. That's a little bit of a special case. It's all on the blade. The start of A would be somewhere around here. A. Okay, that's fine. Otherwise, these are consonants. We have a T, we have a S, whatever. The, sh. Okay, do different things with it depending on the articulation. We divide this in half. This half line is approximately where the Y is. So the Y will kind of come up and maybe push forward a little bit. Okay. It has a little bit of wiggle room. The E and the Y can kind of try to like stretch forward. You're not going to do it from here. You're going to do it from here in the front part. You don't really have to worry about that unless you're having trouble getting a nice, good, clear sound. Y is kind of in the middle. This looks like it's way far back, right? But remember, this part is not going to be under the blade or under the bump. The blade is going to be under the bump. So whether if I'm doing a T, that's on the bump. If I'm doing an it's just low but still under the bump. If I'm doing an oo or a k, it's still low but under the bump. It doesn't change, right? It just roughly stays where it is. So when I do like an E or an oo or it's still going to roughly be in the same spot under the bump, because especially because we're not using this part, right? We go to the back half. This is going to be where our front vowels are. Okay, so again, it's not a one-to-one replica. It's going to look a little messy, but the E is going to be about here. I is going to be about here. Is going to be about here. A is going to be about here. But of course, the height's going to be different. So we're going to lift. We're going to place the E, say maybe about here-ish or so. I is going to be maybe here-ish or so. Is going to be kind of right around here because it's kind of even. Really don't really have, like, you can slightly lift it, but you don't really have to do anything with the front. You can kind of just let it chill in its normal position. And then the A, of course, we do open the jaw at least a little bit. You don't have to open it too much. And that's going to be maybe, say, here-ish. So now we have a nice little staircase. E, I, A. I'm pretty sure I talked about that last live. I don't know if I talked about the structure. E and I share a structure. A and A share a structure. That's something else that we can talk about. I'm not too focused on that right now. But the A, as I said, it's very, very tight. Okay. The E and the A are the only two sounds in the language where the sides of the middle can actually, instead of just being stuck around the corner here, they can actually push through here. You don't want to do it in a way where you flatten your sound. You're actually just taking the edges here that are like that, and you're sort of like stretching them out without actually destroying your shape. It can like modify it very slightly, but you want to keep mostly the same shape. As we saw, like in the you can see that shape. So clearly the shape is there, right? I have an image here, which I don't really want to use in a live because I think this is from another YouTube video, but one of my students sent me this image. So I apologize to whoever this teacher was. I would like to give you credit, but they didn't tell me. So maybe you're familiar with this person's face. I don't know who this is. But you can see that the tongue can actually get a little bit wider, maybe. We can see the shape, right? We can see this dip here. That's where the A is. I'm going to come back to that in a second. We see that it's not on the blade part. It's actually behind the blade. So it's still on the front of the tongue. And if we draw a line, right, like sort of around where this dip begins, and we draw a line to the sides, this part of the tongue is the part that would go back onto the fourth tooth. So again, the A does have a little wiggle as long as you keep your posture in place. It can kind of squish or squeeze forward a little bit. You don't have to do that to do the A. Generally, I recommend that you don't do that because you can break your posture, but whatever works for you, whatever gets you the sound. I don't care what you do as long as you get the right sound. Sound is king. Okay. But you just have to kind of open a bit, push down in here like we're going to talk about more. But that same line that came off of the fourth tooth is going to go back to the fourth tooth. So it's going to roughly stay lined up right here. If we close that mouth, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's that fourth tooth right there. Bam, that part of the tongue will go right back onto that spot. Okay. Again, the fourth tooth is a guide. The fourth tooth is not the important part. It's a guide. The shape is the important part. Okay. So that's that. Now, the key to doing the A, again, we're still in articulation. The key to doing the A is, I don't know if I showed you guys this before. Let me come over here. That's Ishtar. That's something else I'm researching. Things. What is this? Say hello. Wait, are they redoing Sailor Moon, or is that just a different magical series? Magical Girl series. Sorry, I'm distracted. I want to watch new Sailor Moon. That'd be cool. I need to rewatch all the old ones. Like my pajamas. I have Sailor Moon pajamas on right now. Anyway, they're so cute in pink. Like, look, Sailor Moon. They're so cute. I'm sorry, that's not why you're here. Okay. What was I doing? Oh yeah, storm drain pipe. You would think, because I talk about this with people, that I would just save an image. Hopefully none of these images are too copyrighted or whatever. I'm just going to try to find one here. That's not a good one. What am I looking for? Come on. Okay, this one will kind of work. I swear, every single time I do this, I get different results. Okay, this one will work. So you see how there's like this pipe, right? And then the water is flowing out, and it's just sort of like whoosh, it just falls out of the pipe, right? Gravity takes over, and you have a little waterfall. Okay. The sound works kind of like that, but with a twist. So obviously, the top of this we don't have. This the bottom part of this, that would roughly be like our middle shape. Okay, so that's the middle of the tongue. The front of the tongue is going to start right at the edge of that, right? So the actual curved part is the middle tongue, not the front tongue. Okay. And then what you're going to do, you're going to imagine like the front of the tongue is the water that's falling out of that. But this is the key. Remember, all sounds push this way. They want to go with the posture, kind of through the root even. So you're going to feel that in your E, in your I, in your eh, especially in your ah. What the ah is trying to do, and the reason why it can destroy your posture and be such a difficult sound to make, is number one, you have to keep that shape. We're going to talk about resistance in a second. But number two, you need to take that sound right there on that line, right under the fourth tooth, like I showed on the map. And like the water is flowing out here, you're going to push like as if the water is trying to go back underneath. So instead of just falling out with gravity, it's like it's trying to push back under the pipe. Bam. Now you get a nice, good, tight ah. And we get, as I showed you in that image, you could see the dip there because she's pushing like this. Okay. Is one of like the best, easiest sounds to display not only articulation but posture. It's kind of amazing. Now, so you're pushing this here. The jaw's going to open. It doesn't have to open too much. Don't do That's over articulated. That's what most teachers tell you to do. That's too much. You don't got to do that. That's like exaggerated, right? That's special. Just You don't got to do too much. Keep your shape, okay? You can actually push a little bit into the 3 in order to not open the jaw as much. That can help. Or you can open if you want like a sort of a clear, that's a little bit of a lazy if you want like a good clear that's like not overdone, but it's still articulated. You just got to open it like 15% more. Not that much, 10 to 15%. Done. Okay. Don't overdo it. That's the sign of a non-native speaker, is if you overdo the okay. But you're pushing that like it's trying to go under the middle. Okay, it's actually kind of trying to go through the root. All sounds are trying to fall through the root. And then what is the posture going to do? Well, the posture, obviously, your 1 and your 2, they're going to stay where they are. You keep your shape. You don't really have to resist too much necessarily, but it's going to feel kind of tight. Okay, it's going to feel kind of tight because this wants to kind of destroy everything. You want to pull everything with it. Think of it like Superman, right? Superman is standing in the roadway because he's evil, right? And there's a semi truck coming. And what is he going to do? Well, he's not going to get out of the way because he's evil. So he's going to put his hand out, and then the truck's going to come and it's going to hit his hand, and then the truck's going to go like, right? Truck gets destroyed. Superman is fine. That's what the is trying to do to your tongue. That's what it's trying to do to your posture. It's trying to push in here so that everything else goes like this around it. But you can't let that happen, right? We can actually even see that in this image. We can see that the back of the tongue is still low. We can see all the way to the back, right? Now, the back of the tongue in the there's something called raising where it can come up a bit. There's some wiggle room there. You don't have to do that. Okay, I've talked about that in 1 or 2 previous lessons. But there's a cap on how high it can come because you need to keep your posture there. Okay. Because again, the wants to pull it this way. My general recommendation is don't let it come up at all because that's probably going to trigger your posture. Try to keep it low. So as trying to push through here, 1 and 2 stay stable. The three, the three, I'm either going to feel not much, or you can feel a little bit extra pushing down, especially if you don't open the jaw as much. So the three is going to be roughly the same, maybe a little resistance. Definitely don't push up. That's a common problem. Okay. Same thing in your E. Most languages will push up here to do your E. It's not how we do the E. We use the hinge, we lift to the front, we push down and resist in order to create a base that the front can push off of. We do it backwards compared to what you probably do. But the A, because it's so low and everything, we don't usually have to worry about that as much. 5 is the single most important part of the resistance for A. Okay, as I said earlier on our scale, A is 100% up here, is 0%. So you're going to be having the maximum amount of resistance through your center of gravity, through the back of your tongue. Okay, that looks really gross and ugly. There we go. Especially in the center of gravity. One of the biggest problems that when people are trying to do like they'll get the front part pretty good, but then either they'll kind of lose the middle shape, they'll sound flat like or they usually go together. They won't be pushing the center of gravity in as much, and they'll be letting the tongue kind of creep this way a little bit. If you dig into that center of gravity more, push it through, give a little bit more resistance here, but you really dig into the center of gravity itself. So now you have like 0.1, 0.2, and they're both doing this, okay, rather than letting the do that. You're going to balance it by digging more into that center of gravity, and then, of course, keeping your shape, okay? 9 times out of 10, when I tell people to do that, it fixes their and maybe not right away on the first try. They kind of have to figure out how to do it. But for many, many people, first, second, third try, bam, they fix their Can they keep it? That's a different question. They have to practice it and make it, muscle memory and all that stuff. But this is the core resistance of If you don't have enough resistance here, you're not going to have a good okay? Got to keep that shape here as well. Shape is super important. So basically the entire middle, especially the middle, like the back needs to resist and stay in place, but like center of gravity, super important. 1 and 2, super important. This is like so important for Anyway, 11. So I can feel, even though it's very, very tight and it wants to pull things up, I actually don't feel like I have to do too much in the 11. I do feel a little bit. Where the E, for example, I actually feel so much resistance in the root. It's almost like it's doing this, like it's being squished, like toothpaste. The E goes up here and then it goes E, E. Kind of a weird feeling. There's a lot of resistance in the E because E is a high tight front vowel. So it's going to really try to pull and squeeze it up like you might want to do in your language, actually use that to help form the sound. We don't do that. Add doesn't, because it's low, it's mostly affecting the top here. It's trying to like pull this up. It's not really affecting too much down here. So you don't have to worry as much about it, but you should get some resistance there. And that's how you balance everything in the okay? So then if you go from k to right? Now we have 2 sounds. So you start up here in your K. I gotta call this easily the same. You get start up here in your K, right? And we talk about all the posture. This is low. This is resisting this way. This might sort of get pulled up a little, but you're not pushing up. Okay, that's kind of neutral. And then we say, okay, well, what are we going to do as we go to the So you have to shift forward to the So the way that this is resisting, the amount that this is resisting, is going to shift a little bit. Okay, you don't need a lot in the 1 and the 2. You don't need a lot in the 5. You probably need relatively a lot in the root because that's directly below it. Don't really need anything in the 3. As this comes down back to where it was, which, by the way, one of the biggest problems with the kaganga is people don't fully release the tongue all the way back to 0 because your posture wants to kind of hold it high and then you get stuck too high. Make sure as you transition into the next sound, in this case, it comes all the way back down. Okay. But as you do that, you are going to kind of get pulled through the center of gravity. That's one of the effects of the center of gravity. You're not going to hear an but it's pulling it towards itself because it's trying to dig in, right? It's digging in here for the K. And then as you go towards the and you start forming the more, it's going to dig in even more. So it's sort of modifying the way that the tongue is going to stabilize itself between the sounds. Okay. That's kind of advanced and abstract, but think of it again like the moon going around the earth or a comet. There's like a comet and it gets too close to the earth. What's it going to do? It's going to bend its trajectory and head off in a different direction because of the gravitational pull of the earth. This is our earth. The moon is all the sounds. So the moon's going to get sort of pulled along this path as it goes to the ah. It's not going to go here. That's a big mistake. Ka, ka, ka. You're flat, you're tight, maybe forward a little bit. You have to keep your shape. You have to keep that center of gravity dug in. So you're actually kind of doing more like this rather than like that. Okay. This is how you keep the posture. Okay. That's pure posture, not articulation. Okay. But you lower the back, and as you lower the back, you shift through that center of gravity into the ah. So the jaw is going to open a bit. You're going to start pushing more and more down here. You're going to tighten this up. You're going to add more resistance here than you had for the K, a lot more resistance. You're going to loosen up on your root. There's going to be some still, but instead of down, it's going to be down and back. So if you actually focus on the root as you go, ka, 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 I can feel the root sort of going a little bit this way and then a little bit this way. It's like, it's not as much, and it's also shifting a little bit backwards. So it's just trying to stabilize. That's all it is. It's just trying to stabilize in its basic position. Okay. It's not anything fancy. Just keep it where it is for by getting a little bit of resistance. As we said, the 3, maybe it'll push down a little bit for the especially if you do it lazily, but generally you don't have to worry about that. So the 3 and the 4, we don't have to worry too much about. But we can see as we go from k to different pieces are going to resist in different ways, if at all. But all we're doing, the goal that we're trying to do is, hey, when we're here, let's keep all the basic posture in place with the right shape, the right position. As we go to the next sound, let's keep the posture in place with the same shape, the same position. That's all we're doing. It's just this sound pulls on those pieces in a different way that this sound does. And so we have to adjust and resist in different ways depending on what the sound is trying to do to the posture. Okay, it's just a counterbalance to keep everything stable. Again, there's a little wiggle room, but you can't go too wiggly. You're going to break things. Okay, so that's how you go from k to a. Okay, now we have a T left, but we have some more questions. So let's answer some questions. I feel like this is going very well. I don't know how confused you guys are, but I think I'm doing a good job. Leave a comment card and tell me how terrible I'm doing. But okay, we're gonna let the root down and back. I don't know why my sleeves are messed up. I'm gonna let the root down and back. I see the 6 area / top of the throat area visually bulge a little bit when I look at myself in the mirror. Would that happen to you too? Okay. The higher you hold these things, the higher this corner is going to be, right? If I go, pues yo no sé, I'm not a master of Spanish posture, but that probably sounds more Spanish than I normally would. And the lower I go, right? If I go, okay, I'm starting to change my pitch a little bit there, but you will see a little bit of a change through here as you go through your posture. That's part of the lowering stuff. So yes, remember the 6 mostly you just have to make sure you're not pinching in, but probably in your language you are pinching in. So when you stop pinching in, you're going to see this area sort of open up and come down a little bit, and that's fine. Again, the top of the throat, we don't want to directly sort of like pull that down too much or try to manipulate it necessarily. But as the 6 opens up, it's going to kind of push that down a little bit. As this opens up and pushes down, it's going to pull it down a little bit. But as long as we're not directly engaging these muscles to try to lower it, you're not going to get the wrong type of pitch shift. So you have to be careful again around here. But yes, when you go from a higher, tighter posture to a lower posture, you are visually going to see something here. If I go like, keep the same sound, that'd probably be better. But hopefully that makes sense. So visually, you can see some things. Yes. Okay. And yeah, you mentioned the root specifically. That's part of it because that's loosening up and that's helping to come down as well. It's not holding it up with the wrong posture. She is Mary L from Mary L American Accent Coach. Okay, well, shout out to Mary L American Accent Coach. She'll probably never see this. I apologize if you're using your image without your permission. It was sent to me by a student. and it's been very useful. I usually use it just in my private lessons. Thank you, Sam the Chipmunk, for allowing me to give credit to that person. Please don't copyright strike me. um, so the directional tension of sound articulation or formation of each sound is down and back. For example, the sound, we should push it downward and backward on the part of the tongue. The is from where the is from. Correct. Yes. So this is in some sense the realm of articulation, not posture, but it's also in some sense helping to make sure that the articulation goes with the posture as much as possible. And I came to this understanding and this realization. It's not just like, oh, this is how it feels to me, which it is. And it's not just like, oh, I'm just saying this because the posture is doing that. Not at all. I have experience with this. Okay. After working with students for quite a while as I was developing the course, um, I noticed that even if the posture is pretty good, I don't hear really a problem with the 5. Their shape is there in the 1 and the 2. Maybe the root's not too tight. The root can very easily destroy, particularly these front sounds. But let's say the root's okay. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to do not the as in the start of a, which would be like in Spanish, but just our good as in bed, okay, or bet or whatever. Let's say bed and bet at the same time. So that's going to be about, right here, just sort of like even height roughly. Okay. If I imagine that I'm pushing my finger and I'm pushing this way into that part of the tongue versus this way, I'm going to get a little bit of a different quality. Okay. Even if my posture is the same. And if I go 1, 2, 3, you're not going to hear too much difference between 1, 2, or 2 and 3, but you will hear a difference between 1 and 3. Okay. So let me just do this way and this way. So if I'm pushing this way like I normally would, I can even feel like it wants to go with the shape. It wants to go with the center of gravity. It wants to go with the root. Okay. It's all going this way. Like the sound is just pushing into the posture. Okay. If I go the other way and I push this way, which most of you, because your posture pushes this way, you're actually usually form your sounds, I would assume, going this way, but I can't speak on that because I'm not a native speaker and whatever. You're either definitely doing this or you're doing this. Either way, you're pushing forward. I just don't know if you're pushing up or down on the tongue. I think based on my experience, you tend to push this way, but I'm going to push down and back. Okay. So if I go, posture's the same, identical. I took a second there to make sure that it was the same. Just by trying to push it this way, I do feel a little extra tension here that I have to lock in more because immediately just by pushing this way, it wants to start going with it, right? So there's a relationship between the posture and the sounds. But I kept my posture essentially identical, and we got a completely different quality of the same sound. And this is a perfect illustration. I like this question. This is a perfect illustration of why posture itself is important, and why the way that you, if you work against the posture by pushing the sound the wrong way, even if your posture is good, you're going to get the wrong quality because you're still doing things the opposite way that you should, or the wrong way that you should. So you want to work with the posture. Again, most languages, they push up from the root, they push up from the 3, and they'll go through like this, right? E, 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 E. E sound very similar, but we can hear a little bit of different quality there. E, E. I don't have full control over my root. It's a newer thing for me to modify, so probably don't sound perfect for any language there. But if I were to do like, if I could do like an or like an a, right? Like e, like that's I'm working with a student right now who is I forget the exact language because I think it's Kenyan. I'm not sure. I apologize. I don't remember specific details like that, but she speaks an African language, and we've been working, quite a lot on getting her to stop saying e and getting her to start saying right? But it's essentially that start of a sound, but there's a little bit of a quality to it, like e, right? where our start of A would be like e. Different quality, different posture. Now, if I take my start of A and I push this way instead, remember that sounds up here. If I go instead of eh, 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 trying to keep my posture the same, pushing this way on the sound now instead, different quality. Okay, because I'm working against the posture. That's also going to bring intention in the posture because I feel like I have to add more here. I might have to add more here in order to keep it in place because now I'm trying to push this way on the sound. And it doesn't seem like it would be that big of an effect, but it does have an effect, especially in the back because the back is our big stabilizing piece. So you need the sounds to work with the posture, and every sound should be pushing this way, especially vowel sounds. Consonant sounds, it's kind of hard to feel that you're doing that. But yeah, we'll talk about that with the T here in a second. There's some interesting T details you guys will probably be interested in. This is harder than rocket science. It's complex. It's complex. And as I said, this seems chaotic and kind of like all over the place because, sorry, but if you were to go into the class, it's very structured. Like I have it all laid out, right? I've showed you guys the sort of syllabus or overview of the course before. We have the we try to get that good enough. We throw in the ah, maybe talk a bit about the h. We start looking at ta, da, na. It's very structured, very step by step. Right now, you guys are asking me questions about the and this and that, and I'm trying to give you an example with cat, and I'm assuming that you don't know anything. So, like, by the time we get to a word like cat, you'll already know how all these pieces work in each of these sounds, more or less. Maybe not the a, but in the k and the t for sure. We add that a in there. We add the a details. You start saying k, a, t, cat. Okay. It's very structured and it's very sort of step by step where you're just building, building, building. It's not like overall it's complex because human speech is complex. You're doing the same type of thing in your language all the time and you don't realize you're doing it. Okay. And if you weren't, you wouldn't have your accent. You wouldn't have like your pronunciation in your native language. So yes, it does seem complex, but the course, it's a lot simpler than this. We go step by step and we figure it out as we go. I don't rush you guys. I try to make sure you can do a certain number of details well enough before we move on. If I feel like, hey, you're struggling with, getting that 11 in place, you keep closing the throat, we're going to sort of hang around a little bit before we get too far, work on that. And then once that's a little more stable, we say like, okay, that's good enough. Let's keep building on top of that as we go. And you just keep refining it little by little by little. An example like this is going to be chaotic. Especially because, again, as I said, I'm assuming you guys don't know anything. So I'm trying to give you every piece of information about the posture and the sound from scratch. And that seems very complicated, right? You would learn that step by step for the sounds as we go, not in this big mess. So when forming the diphthongs a, I, ow, and oi, how do we retract them while keeping the center of gravity? I don't even want to answer that question. Diphthongs are complicated because they're diphthongs, right? We're not just doing two sounds next to each other. We're doing them in a way where they blend together into like a single sound unit. They do have a different start and end point, yes. And that can bring extra challenges for stabilizing the posture. Like, especially like I is a perfect example because like the start of I is like right in here. Okay. It's like the only sound on the front of the middle. And then the I is here. And so the tongue is like the jaw is going to be more open. The tongue is going to be low when we're, doing the part. Posture is going to be stabilizing. This is going to be, stabilizing however it needs to stabilize, right? Again, those are the two big important pieces. You keep your shape still, all that stuff. And then as we go to the I, not only do we have to close that jaw up, at least back to the neutral position, you can go a little bit farther for the I and the E, but we not only do we have to close the jaw back up to where it was, make sure we get back on that fourth tooth while keeping the shape. Your 5 resistance and your root resistance are going to shift. Now, because they're both essentially front sounds, the type of resistance, like the 5 always resists this way, the root is still going to be resisting that way. but you're going to feel a shift because you're going from a sound that's farther back to a sound that's farther forward, and you're going from a sound that's lower to a sound that's higher, right? And the jaw also is going to be moving along with that. So, especially around the root area, you're going to feel like, okay, they're both down and back, but the degree that they're down and back, right? It's mostly degrees in these front sounds. Like some is a little bit, some is more a lot. You never want to get too tight, not pinching it, not narrowing it. But you're going to feel a shift as like this goes like this, right? Your root, your jaw. Okay. And then as that jaw closes back up and you lift the front of the tongue to go to the you're going to feel their root shift in a sort of a slightly different way, but it's still trying to hold itself down and back again. It's just trying to maintain basically where it is for but it needs to do that differently between these two sounds because of how they're formed. Um, I is a good one to kind of practice with. It's relatively simple. Um, Ow, as I said, it's the most mechanically complex sound in the language. I'm not even going to talk about that right now. Oi is relatively easy because we just start in an actual monophthong O. The lips are already engaged. Oi. You don't have to do like any like the diphthong or the sort of like the to O like I teach you guys. Just oi. Okay. And that's relatively straightforward because like you already have your resistance in the O, and then the it is kind of like almost in front of it in a way. Oi. But of course, this is low in the O. It'll come up in the I while this maybe relaxes a little bit. And then your center of gravity, you'll feel it digging in for the O. And then as you shift into the I, you'll just sort of feel it like maybe dig in a little bit more as you go. The root might shift a bit as well. Or yeah, it's going to be pulling this way for the O. It's going to start pulling this way for the I. So you'll feel a shift there. Mostly in the 5, you'll mostly just feel an increase, particularly in the center of gravity. You'll just feel an increase from the O to the I as you go forward because it's going to want to pull it more forward. But you'll feel the shift in the diphthongs. The diphthongs are really good for feeling like a shift in the posture while still being stable, not shift in like how it's changing, but shift in the resistance of the posture to keep itself where it is. Whereas if you go from like k to a to t, because those are separate discrete sounds, it could be a little bit harder to feel, but a diphthong is supposed to be blended. So in order, if you're going to blend it correctly, you're going to feel that the posture is sort of like moving along with the sound formation a little bit better than if you have separate sounds. But yeah, how it's a lot of the same things I've been telling you. You add enough 5. It's particularly in center of gravity. Again, that's sort of the big important part of the 5, but the back of the tongue is important as well. And then your root, if it's going this way, if it's going this way. The the ul, and the they're in a special exception group for the root, where we actually get more of like a wheel that's turning and tightening. Yeah, sorry. But that 2 students yesterday, telling them like how to do the 5 and how to do the with this sort of wheel idea. They've been trying to get the for like months, and then like they've been getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. As I said, it's a hard sound. Instant fix. Maybe there's still like microscopic little thing that I can maybe point out, but it's like that sounds pretty much native. Okay. When you do the right thing happens. So yeah, you just balance each of the pieces correctly. And again, it's not like, well, how do I know what to do in my like 1 and 2, and how do I know what to do in my 5 and like sound X and sound Y and sound Z and sound blah 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 blah. You're just trying to keep the posture in its base. That's why we build the first. If you can get into a nice, good, perfect, or near perfect sound where everything's in place, you sound clear. Quality is right. You're not anything like that. It just sounds more or less like an American would. That's your base. So then you say, okay, well, any sound that I do, I'm going to have resistance based on how that sound is pulling against these pieces. And the resistance is just trying to keep it where it is. That's all. That's going to feel different from sound to sound, but it's just trying to keep it where it is. Posture is, I don't want to say static because it dynamically adjusts, but posture is universal. It's always the same in every sound, where the articulation is the thing that changes, right? You're either doing an or you're not doing an but back of the tongue is going to try to stay in the same position, whether you're doing k, t, doesn't matter. Okay. For me, maybe scooping them helps me a lot. Let's see. A, I, ow. Ow is a little bit of a weird scoop, but yeah. That can certainly help, particularly if you're going from farther back, whether that's or a back sound, to farther forward. So if you say like or you say cat or whatever, generally speaking, in terms of the resistance, the center of gravity is going to want to dig in more and more as you go from the back to the front. And the back of the tongue it's still resisting, but it's going to mostly, if you do it correctly, it's going to mostly feel like it's just trying to hold itself down. So between those two, as the front of the tongue like lifts and shapes into whatever it's doing, like a t or an e or whatever, it'll feel like, okay, like I go from like k to I feel a little less in a 'cause I'm going this way. But if I go like cut, for example, cut, I can feel that like the back of the tongue is high in the K, and then it sort of like comes back to neutral for because I'm actually doing an sound. And then as this starts to lift more and more, I'll feel like I'm scooping. It's not necessarily that objectively the tongue is coming lower, but the tension is trying to lock in against this pull, and it kind of feels like I'm scooping in the center of gravity, and on the back of the tongue is like trying to scoop like that. Okay. That's what it feels like. There's a difference between position and tension. So, or sorry, position and direction. So I could be perfect position, but I can tense the middle forward. I could just get some tension without like pushing. I'm not pushing anything where I'm just sort of getting a little forward tension. I go, I'm sorry, that was an we get a little bit of a different quality, different sound because I'm pushing this way now, right? Kind of like what I was saying with how you're forming the sounds, like pushing the right way on the sounds. Um, so you're not necessarily trying to like lower even more as this comes up, but you're going to feel the tension trying to keep it locked as this tries to pull on it. It's just because this is pulling on it, you're going to feel an increased tension. You're not necessarily changing the position of the tongue. Again, there's a little wiggle room. It's not static, but generally going to stay where it wants to stay for everything is built around Looks like I missed a comment. No, I didn't. Okay, for example, okay. Yeah, okay, I got that. Good. Yeah, we're kind of. Let's talk about the t sound. The T. I don't think I missed anything. Bleh. All right. So the T sound. Let me clean this up a little bit. Such a mess. Do 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 do. Okay, that's good. I guess this is a little bit in the way, but that's fine. We can have that for reference. So we have our K here. We have our A here. Okay, so this is K. This is A. Right. Notice I put it a little lower. It could be a little bit lower than that still because the jaw is going to, probably open, but gives us a good idea of about where it is. So K to A. Again, you're going to dig in more in your 5 as you do that. Now the T is going to be on the blade. It's going to lift up. It's going to touch the bump. Again, we want as little surface area as possible. Do not use the tip. We want it to be crisp. So again, you can kind of squeeze a little bit. Now, there's a little extra consideration when we talk about these high front consonant sounds, the t, the s, and the sh, as well as their voiced versions. Not necessarily as much in the th, but because that one's kind of weird, sort of stretches forward in the front. But t, d, n, s, z, and sh, j. And we can also say maybe the y, because that's kind of on the middle part there. Remember what I said earlier. Wherever the sound is, whatever part of the tongue the sound is on, that's the part of the tongue that you're using. Okay. So we say, well, we're using the front of the tongue for the T. No. You're using the front half of the tongue for the T. You're using the blade for the T, which means this part of the tongue will try to stay down. Okay. Now you're not obviously like you can do an extreme version of that and end up using the tip of the tongue. We don't want to do that. Okay. We don't want it to be tight. We don't want it to be too angled. Don't overdo it. Just like we said here with the K, this is trying to stay down, but it's going to kind of get pulled up a little bit as you do that K. That's fine, but the tension is trying to stay down, and then this is just pushing up against that. It's kind of the same with the T. Okay. The tip will kind of just be hanging out here a little bit. You do not want to do this. Okay, again, we're not seeing the sides. I'm going to talk about the sides. This is just like the through the middle body from like the tip of the tongue through the middle. Okay, you don't want the middle of your tongue to, or the body of your tongue to be like this, because number one, we just destroyed the front of our shape. Number two, this is going to take up too much space. If I try to do something like that, like number one, it's hard for me to do that without pushing forward. So that's going to get in the way too. But if I go ta, okay, you're not going to do that, right? Ta, ta, ta. I don't know, some kind of like that. You're gonna modify the space, so when the T opens, the space is gonna be different. You're gonna have less space. We want more space. Okay, it's gonna make it sound weird. It's hard for me to do it that way. But a lot of students try to do it that way, more or less. And again, it can also help push this up this way more. Next thing you know, you're kind of here. You're trying to keep it here, so now you're like fighting against it. Okay, no. What you're gonna do, it's not like this. That would be too much. That's great. That's not gonna work. But this part is gonna want to stay down. Of course, here, the front of your 1 and 2 wants to stay in place. So you're really, the T is gonna want to pull it up this way or pull it in this way or flatten it. We can't let that happen. So your shape needs to stay the same. The back half, you're gonna be digging in with your center of gravity, but the back half, like in terms of your 1 and 2, you don't have to really resist very much. That's fine. But the front, the T is going to try to destroy because the T is on the front of the tongue and it's going to try to pull that with it. So you have some extra resistance here in your 1 and 2. You try to make sure that the front of the tongue doesn't get pulled too high. So it's going to be kind of something sort of like that. Okay. T, t, t. Roughly speaking, again, this is approximate. But you want this to kind of try to stay out of the way, right? I can draw it a little bit better. Something kind of like that, maybe. T, t. Yeah, I feel like this is a pretty good drawing of how my tongue feels here. T, t, t. Okay. Again, as little surface area as possible. Sort of squeeze right here. Don't squeeze back here. Right, just around the blade. Squeeze around the blade. T, t, t. Yeah, that nice crisp T sound. Congratulations. So even though I don't want to do that, even though this part is not specifically part of the posture, it's not being used. So just like, say, if I'm doing a T, I don't want to just bring up the back of my tongue for no reason. That's not part of the T. That's, why would I do that? Okay. It's the same thing. You don't want this to raise. Now, when we're talking about, say, like the E and the id, the front can be sort of like pulled along with it. So obviously, like, it's not going to try to stay down and this is just going to come up. Don't try to do that. That's not needed. And in the original way that I described the E in like my very first lesson that I ever made, pretty much, I said that it felt to me like the E was here because this was kind of tense. And that seems to go against a lot of what I'm telling you guys. Upon further inspection, I realized that in the E, because the E itself is tight, the blade area can get tight with it, but it doesn't have to. It's actually here, and I couldn't initially feel that because there's so much tension here for the sound. I can do it without any tension there at all. Okay. And yeah, you can get a little bit of a shape like this in your E, that's fine, but the sound itself is here on the back half. You can have it just kind of be relaxed and do your E there, but because it's a high and tight sound, you're going to have some tension through here, especially in the back half. I've said before, the is flexible. It can kind of be pointed this way. It can be pointed this way. It doesn't necessarily matter because, again, this isn't part of the sound. As long as it doesn't get in the way and you're not too tight, because it is a more relaxed sound compared to E, then you're fine. Okay. So because that's sort of at the very end of the tongue, we don't need any posture stabilization. We just don't really want to use it. We're just using this part of the tongue. But in the T, we are using this part of the tongue. And so we want to make sure that we're not really using this part of the tongue. Okay. It just sort of hangs out. Right. And you can get a little resistance to kind of keep that space. Again, we're trying to keep space at all times, especially in the middle. This comes up, we have space in the middle and the front. This comes up, we have space in the middle and the back. There's always like a certain volume of space. And if you delete too much space, you're going to have problems. Best case scenario, you won't sound clear. Worst case scenario, you'll start losing the accent. Especially depending on how you're losing the space. If you're pushing up through here, you're definitely going to start losing the accent. Like our accent, the accent that you want to make. So that's a general description. The rest of the posture for the T. So your 1 and 2, again, your shape is still there. you're going to have quite a bit of resistance. Like I said earlier on our scale, T is maybe like 70 to 80% resistance. Okay, so that's going to dig in quite a bit. We saw was 100%. So from the K, you go from like a little resistance here. You have like maximum resistance here. And then you sort of relax that, close up the jaw a bit, lift the front into the T, and you are still going to have quite a bit, but not as much as so you'll feel less. Again, the 5 always does this, so it's just going to be a degree of how much. You're not really getting, like, you might feel scooping depending on if you're going from like back to front, but if you're going front to front, you won't really feel scooping. You'll just feel like a different degree of the resistance. The root again is complicated. It's down in the K. It's going to go a little bit down and back in the A, because it doesn't need a whole lot since it's already, we already talked about that. But then in the T, that's a high front sound. You're actually going to need more in the root. E needs more than T, only because T has the benefit of being able to sort of touch something, and it has more of a scaffolding, so it doesn't need as much resistance. It's not floating, right? Same thing with S. It has a little bit more. It's slightly open compared to T, but it still has most of the same scaffolding. Same thing with SH. But the E is a very high, tight front sound, and it has to sort of float to some extent. You're still touching the fourth tooth, but it's not really like going up along the sides in the same way that the T and the S would. So it doesn't have as much structure, and so it needs a little bit more resistance there. So it's not just like, generally the higher you go, the more resistance you'll need, but there is a difference between vowels and consonants if we want to get very technical. That's more of a minor detail that you might need to address if you don't sound quite right. But generally, as long as you're resisting the same direction, you'll probably sound more or less like perfect. That's sort of something we have to figure out as we get feedback and go through things. So it's complex. It's complex, right? I didn't invent it. This is just posture, okay? It exists. And if you want to do the accent, you can't just articulate the sounds. You have to stabilize the posture. I'm trying to make it as easy as I can for you guys, as much as that seems not to be the case. Would you agree that the American accent has a bit of a nasality and vocal frying when speaking? No, not necessarily. So our nasal flap tends to be relatively closed. My particular voice, I have a bit of nasality. I have a little bit of nasality in my voice. There's speakers that have that to some extent. There's some speakers that get really nasally. That doesn't sound normal. That doesn't sound standard. That is annoying to most people. So if I'm up here in my nose like this is going to really stand out. It's going to be annoying to most people. It's going to be hard for people to focus on what I'm saying, because they're going to be listening to all the nasality, and it's going to grate on their ears. And I'm not judging anybody. If you have a more nasally voice and you're an American English speaker or whatever language you speak, okay, that's fine. That's how you speak. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that's not the standard. That's not the norm. And so having a little bit of nasality is sort of within the realm of norm, but if you get too nasal, you're not going to sound like the average speaker, right? And that's generally the goal, is you want to kind of sound within that average range on most things. If you were to get no nasality, like absolutely no nasality like this, see that when I hit the sound can't go through my nose, because I use the back of my tongue to close off my soft palate, so it's completely 100% sealed. And so now it sounds kind of like I'm sick, like I have a stuffy nose. So you don't want to do that either. It's going to be a little bit open. There's always going to be a little bit going through the nose, even for the people who have the least nasality. But there's a little wiggle room there. Like you can get some little percentage of nasality and still sound fine. Like some people might notice my nasality, some people don't. I really notice it on the phone. Like if I hear a recording of myself or something. I have a friend who sounds a lot like me, especially on the phone, and he sounds a bit nasally too. That's fine. Vocal fry, completely irrelevant, 100% irrelevant. There's a perception that like Americans maybe have like more of a vocal fry, and I think that's largely because of the impact of like Hollywood on culture and world media and stuff. Because the vocal fry tends to be very present in more of like that sort of like Valley Girl type speak, like, oh my God, like whatever. So that's maybe a disproportionate thing. And then there's a lot of people, even very educated people, who will tell you like, oh, vocal fry is bad. It's wrong. It's not supposed to be part of American English. You should have no vocal fry, blah, 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 blah. And as far as I understand, maybe it's bad for the vocal cords. I don't know. I've heard people say it's not. I've heard people say it is. Regardless of whether it's good or not for you physically, there's people in all walks of life, of all educational levels, highest to lowest, different jobs, different whatever, and they'll have different levels of vocal fry. You might have someone that's very educated, very well off, from a good background or whatever, might have a lot of vocal fry, might have no vocal fry. You could have somebody who's super poor from a particular part of the country, maybe they, whatever. They might have a lot of vocal fry, they might have little vocal fry. It does not matter. Vocal fry is just a variable thing that is just part of the way that some people speak. It can be adjusted. You can reduce it if you want. If you get a little vocal fry in your speech, that's fine. But don't think that adding a vocal fry will make you sound more American, because it won't. Okay. I have a little bit of vocal fry. Okay. Especially when I wake up, I have a lot of vocal fry. And that's fine. But you don't have to do vocal fry. Okay. So a bit of nasality, fine. Not really necessary, but it's okay. Vocal fry, completely optional. It's up to you. I would just personally, unless you naturally have a bit of vocal fry in your American English, I wouldn't try to add it, because you're just adding another complication. Like, if you can do it pretty easily, fine, go ahead. I don't care if you want to sound how you sound. That's fine. But I would recommend, why make yourself more complicated, or make your life more complicated. Okay, when you slowly release the T, you start from a pinpoint right in the center, okay? And then the opening slowly widens outward like a wedge. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about that little articulation detail, which at some point goes through the S-ish sound. Is that right? Yeah, pretty much. So the last thing for the T that I could talk about is, the last two things. One is, like, what are the sides doing for this part? Because we said that it stays down, but obviously the sides are creating a seal along the top. So it's not like this whole thing is trying to stay down while this is up. That would, like, you wouldn't be able to do a T. You'd be like, "Ka, ka," or something like that. Okay. So there's that. And then there's also some of the minor articulation details here, kind of like we talked about with the K. And what I'm about to tell you also applies to the K. I forgot to mention in the K as well, because there's so many, like, little details that I could mention, right, depending on what we're talking about. Usually it's a case-by-case basis based off how the student sounds. I'll bring up the relevant details. They'll come to mind based on what I hear. There's so many little tiny details. So again, if you're taking the actual course, this seems really complicated, but based on how you sound is what I'm going to direct you to do. I may not have to tell you every little tiny detail, right? Okay. When you're doing the T and the K, the air opens the sound. The breath opens the sound. This is why it's also important to have the breath. It is the breathing. If your breathing is not correct, you cannot articulate a T and a K correctly for American English. You can do a T and a K. It just won't sound quite right. And there's some wiggle room there, like there is for everything. But the breath, especially for the strong T and K, if it's a weaker one, the breath is still flowing, but it's not going to be as plosive, right? It's not going to be as strong. You may not have to really pinch as much to get it as crisp. That's fine. But for a nice, good, strong T and K, the breath really opens that sound. We don't use the muscle to, like, okay, I'm up here and then I'm going to, like, use my muscle to T. Doesn't work that way. Same thing back here. We don't go like here and then K. We don't do that. The breath will open it. And how does the breath open it? Well, you have a nice, good seal here or here, depending on which sound we're doing. The breath is going to try to come up. It's going to be blocked by that seal, depending on which sound we're doing. If we start in the back with the K, we'll work our way to the T. What's going to happen? Well, it's going to start opening a tiny little hole right here in the middle first. Now, this is so small and happens so quickly that you really have to slow it down to feel it, okay? But if I go really, really slow, I don't feel like the whole back just starts coming off. I feel that there's a tiny little hole, a tiny little pinpoint that, again, the pinching, that's part of why the pinching, narrowing right here on the sound, not the posture, helps to get that crisper sound, because I'm putting pressure there. And then when the air tries to come through, it has to push itself through that little pinpoint, okay? So I get... Okay. And then as soon as it opens, the tongue just relaxes. It just comes down. We don't, like, try to use the muscle to push it down or open anything. We just let the breath come through. It's like a dam breaking, right? So it's like the dam is, like, it's starting to, like, show some cracks, it's leaking, and then boom, dam bursts. Okay. Okay. K. I do that quickly. K, k. But it starts at that little point. Okay. Same thing with the T. You're going to have your blade touching, little contact as possible. Get a little pinch. Okay. Air is going to come up. It's going to get trapped here. It's going to start opening that little hole that's being pinched. It almost sounds kind of like an S a little bit. Okay. And then again, once that opens, it just relaxes and done. Okay. You want to pinpoint that hole. By the way, that particular detail also works with the lips. The lips are a completely different topic. We have to talk about the tension here. We have to talk about the tension here. We have to talk about the tension here. We're front biased in the P and the B, or in the lips in general, so that we don't want to like out the sides. You're gonna have some tension. Again, it's sort of pinching. It's narrowing to a point. Right here, your lips are maybe going to come out a little bit. I talked about how like it could be like this, could be like this, could be like this. There's a range for it. It doesn't really necessarily matter, but you're going to get some forward tension from the corners up to the tip. And if you look closely and you go really slow, you should just see this tiny, tiny little hole opening. And once that hole opens, just like the T and the K, it just opens. That's how you get a nice, good, strong P. If it's a weaker P, you don't necessarily have to have all that tension, but that's fine. Say happy, I don't really have to do that, but it's generally formed roughly the same. You just need more resistance and you're going to have more tension in the strong P because it has to pinpoint and push more air through. Okay, so the TK and the P all work that way. That's how you get a nice, good, crisp, aspirated, voiceless stop sound. The voice ones work roughly the same, but they don't tend to need as much of that whatever. You know what I mean? Hopefully. I'm losing my thoughts. The sides of the T, or the back of the front in the T. Again, you have to make a solid seal. So you have your fourth tooth here, same part of the tongue is touching. As this comes up, and then now you're touching here with your T, right? Well, the sides of the tongue, again, the body is going to try to stay low, like we see in our diagram, but the sides, they're going to go ahead and just kind of come up. You're going to feel, or you can feel, you don't necessarily have to. If the fourth tooth ends here, and say like the third tooth is sort of here, you're going to feel sort of the groove between the fourth and third tooth here on the sides of the back of the front. Okay. And then you feel the rest sort of like come up around to that blade area near the tip. Okay. So the sides, it's not that like the sides are lifted. It's just that because we need to create a full seal and because this is all the way up, the sides are going to kind of like, they're going to go along the teeth and along the top of the mouth. But in order to keep the space in the mouth and make sure that, you know, everything gets articulated correctly, you're sort of like pushing down here, but just in the body. So like this is like, I don't know, it's kind of like that. I can't ignore this part. I'm just trying to show you the sides. It's kind of like that, I guess. And then it'll come up like that, if that makes sense. But with this part intact. My voice gets tired very fast and sounds like I'm doing the vocal fry on purpose. I don't know. Usually if you have a thing where you run out of something quickly, it's a stamina thing. So, you know, how do you run longer and farther? You keep practicing running. I don't know. I don't really have too much advice for that. But if you're worried about that, I wouldn't worry about that. Like if you don't want to have the vocal fry, then okay, you can try to fix it. But it doesn't really matter. Like if you just sound like you have more vocal fry. If people are noticing like, hey, sometimes you have a lot of vocal fry, sometimes you don't, and that annoys you, then okay, maybe do something about it. But it's not necessarily something you have to care about too much. But yeah, I think the stabilization column, the number 5, center gravity and base, yeah. Well, technically the stabilization column is the red line going through here. I don't even really have to talk much about that these days anymore. It is still an important underlying concept, but the way that I'm teaching it now, I find that I don't have to actually directly mention that anymore. It played a very important role in the development of the course. Um, if I need to mention it to a student, depending on what they're doing, I will. It's a tool in my toolbox. But yeah, I don't really use a stabilization column as a concept in the current version of the course unless needed. So that's one of the cool things. Like once I got the throat and the breath integrated, I was like, oh my God, there's so many things that are just like taking care of themselves that I thought I had to directly fix for most people, at least. So it's really nice. But I discovered a lot along the way. um, so yeah, the number 5 and number 11 is essential for mastering the and achieving the American accent. I agreed that number 5 is like a metal rod, like everything. Um, everything moves around it. Yeah, essentially. Um, and I kind of mentioned that earlier, like the 5 and the 11, because remember, we're low and we're back. The back of the tongue is where everything gets mostly stabilized. Again, a lot of it is up here because this is where the sounds are directly. So the 5 is the sort of the most important stabilizing piece, but the root, you definitely want to make sure you don't use the root wrong because that's going to push into your 5. That's going to like maybe want the 3 to tighten up. You're going to maybe be pushing through here. Like the root can cause all kinds of problems. It can pull this up and tighten it. It can pull this up. It can pull your 9 up. It can do all kinds of like crazy things. And it's the root is usually a really hard thing to kind of like fully get into just 0 position. But once you get it, it's usually not that bad. But the back of the tongue as a whole, from the 5 to the 11, yes, that is really like that's the stabilization column is running right through there. And so, especially with how we use the front of the tongue, we tend to use the hinge to support this, and then this just wants to stay stable. It creates sort of like like a heavy back, so that the front can kind of just flick around and do whatever it wants. And most of our sounds are up here anyway, right? Um, so we're very back heavy. In fact, one way that I like, even though the 5 would be like the most important, 11 would be the second most important in terms of stabilizing things. But collectively, because again, the 3 wants to kind of go with the root. So you can still have your 3 off when you do the 11, but generally, if the 11 is a little off, the 3 will be a little off. So it's really kind of this whole thing. Like this is like a whole cradle. Like the tongue is just trying to sit into this like big chair, and then the front can kind of just do whatever it wants. Right. And if you stabilize that right, you're going to have a much more solid, consistent accent. Of course, unfortunately, there are some sounds on the back, and that makes it more complicated. Sorry. If it were up to me, I'd just erase all the back sounds and then you could just use all these and then you wouldn't have to worry about it, right? That'd be pretty simple. But yeah, and then again, especially up here, a lot of these higher front sounds, what most languages do is they also want to engage the 3. They want to engage the root. Okay. Um, can't do that. So especially in these front sounds, you really have to make sure that you stay in position. And then on the back of the tongue, we don't need as much on the 5, but we do need some. We don't generally need much back in the root, but we do need to make sure it stays low. And then the 3, maybe it'll kind of get pulled around a bit, but we don't really need the 3 very much in the back of tongue sound. So that's a lot simpler. And why? Because these are back of tongue sounds. So if the back of the tongue plus maybe the 3 a bit is the biggest stabilizing force, well, if the sound is on the back of the tongue, it doesn't have to stabilize as much because it's not going to, the back of the tongue can't pull on that posture as much as the front of the tongue can, right? So it's like if you have a good base and you kind of reach for something, you're solid. If you have a good base, but then you reach for something over here, it's like you're trying to do this, and now you have to balance yourself more, right? It's kind of just physics, really. It makes sense to me anyway. So yeah, very very important to have that back of the tongue, the whole back of the tongue, nice and consistently in place. Um, does vocal fry have something to do with not having enough breath by any chance? Um, I'm not an expert on vocal fry. I watched a couple of videos on it before because I wanted to know the actual details, and I forgot a lot of those details because I don't care. Um, the breath, in my experience, can have an effect on the vocal fry, but like generally the more breath you have, I think the less vocal fry you'll have, or maybe that's just because I'm also adjusting something else. But if I like say if I have more breath, but I try to do a vocal fry, if I'm like if I have less breath and I don't try to do vocal fry, uh, uh, like I don't know. It seems like it's harder to do a vocal fry if you have more breath. But then we say, well, vocal fry seems to be something that a lot of American speakers do. Again, it's very diverse. It's not necessarily a normal thing, a standard thing. And yet we use more breath in most languages. So you would think that American English would have like less vocal fry, where other languages would have more vocal fry. So I don't think there's an exact relationship between them, unless other posture things counterbalance that, like maybe how you hold the throat. If you have less breath, it'll actually counterbalance the vocal fry with the less breath. Um, I don't know, but it does seem harder for me to do vocal fry if I try to breathe more. So, um, if I remember right, vocal fry is like the vocal flaps, like the vocal folds, they're not like fully opening, they're kind of lazy or something. And so, like, as the air passes through them, you get like a buzz, like, or if I open them nice and wide, it just sounds clearer. So, it's just because like the air, like the sound is sort of like, it's like sort of like leaking through almost like a bunch of bubbles, you know? Where if I just open it and I don't have it lazy, you just have like a jet stream going through. I don't know. Heart. Yay. Thank you for the heart. When I have the flu, my voice gets kind of fry-ish. Anyway, just rambling. Yeah, that can happen too. Yeah. Because when you're sick, what do? Your muscles tend to be more relaxed. In fact, I've had students come to class sick plenty of times. Generally, if they're not feeling well, we can reschedule. That's not a problem. But I have students who come, they're like, "No, I'm kind of getting better. I'm okay. I think I can do it." And if it seems to me that they can't do it, I'll just insist we reschedule. But usually, it's not a problem. They're kind of recovering from it. But they say, "Hey, like, I noticed that they sound a little better." And they said, "Yeah, hey, I noticed that when I was sick and I was speaking English, I actually think I sounded better." And that's usually the case. Why? Because when you're sick, even in your native language, a lot of these muscles tend to kind of relax, right? It's not like you completely lose your accent or something, but it wants to kind of move more in the direction of where we are. Uh, and so you tend to sound better. Now, you can also maybe end up with a little bit more of a vocal fry because of that relaxation. Um, but not necessarily. It depends on what's being relaxed, right? So it is the case that generally being sick will make you sound better, but then it's like, okay, well, how do I replicate that when I'm not sick? So maybe try to remember how you feel, and then that's one thing that you can do. It's not the thing to do, but okay. Anyway, got about an hour until my class. I think we're kind of tying up. Oh, I did just remember. Yeah, I was supposed to talk about how stress, our posture affects the stress. Um, Yeah. So there's a tie in there, between the posture and the stress. So, and the reason I use cat as an example is because the sound is, again, very easy to demonstrate these things with. So even if I don't say the word cat, if I just say the sound, we'll start simple. Remember, as I was saying earlier, that you can do like a fully enunciated or over exaggerated okay? And then you can do sort of a lazier Well, the general rule, which is just basic logic, right? All sounds have sort of like a fully articulated version and then sort of a lazier version where it's like we get enough into position, we get enough into like the shaping or whatever, that it's clearly that sound, it's in range, but it's maybe not like the best, most clearly articulated version of that sound. So if I do E, that's when we tend to pull the lips. E, fully in place, nice, good, full posture resistance, lips get wide. That's fine. You don't have to use your lips for the E, even if you're articulating, although it does help make it even sound even more articulated. But instead of going E, let's say I go a little relaxed, not fully in the E, but I'm not in the eh. I'm still doing the right sound. I'm around the right place, just not fully engaged. Don't even have to use my lips. E, E, C, 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 C. We would hear that as the same sound. Okay. Now, maybe in your language, that would be either two different sounds or on the barrier of two different sounds. But within the context of English, or American English at least, um, those are within the same range of one sound. So our brain would parse it as an E, not an eh, right? Depending on your language and where your sound boundaries are, you might hear something different. Like Spanish speakers don't have eh, so sometimes I hear them say eh, like they'll say sin instead of seen, which is without, but they don't notice it. They think that they hear seen because their brain just interprets eh as part of E. So anyway, Uh, Same is true for the same is true for pretty much all the sounds, especially the vowels. If I do a nice good well, what's gonna happen? If I'm going more into a sound, if I'm getting more pressure, more shaping, more tension, even if it's a relatively relaxed sound, right? The relaxed sounds like and ah, they already need less resistance in the posture. If I fully articulate them, they need maybe a little bump in that resistance, but they're already really relaxed. So you don't really need that much. But like E or A, which are really tight sounds, when you do the lazier versions, they're still pretty tight. They're still relatively tight to all the other sounds. Um, but you don't necessarily need as much resistance, right? Because if I'm not fully engaging and fully like trying to push into that sound, I'm just doing it like enough to where I'm in range. I don't have to resist as much. Okay. So stress, right? Because you're like, well, what does this have to do with stress? Well, is usually found in a stress syllable. Like that's the most common place where it's found. But we have, for example, like cat is stressed. Okay. Cat. We have the word at, which is a preposition. That's usually not stressed. Okay. And it could be reduced, but let's say we don't even reduce it because you don't have to reduce it. It will commonly be reduced, but you don't have to reduce it. So we're going to keep the a sound, but let's see what happens. So if I say cat, it's going to get louder, it's going to get longer. We're going to spend a lot of time through that a. I'm going to need a lot of resistance. I'm not going to over enunciate. I'm just going to do a nice, good, clear a that's like, solidly articulated. Okay. So I go cat, cat. I see a cat. I see a cat. Okay, it's not cat. That I would need even more resistance. It's one reason I tell you not to do that, because you can do it if you're over articulating for a special reason or something. It's not the normal way to say it, and you'll probably break your posture. Okay. But if I say at, not stressed, okay, instead of at, I can just say at, 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 at. Still an a. It's lazier a. It's not as clear. It's still an a. I don't need to resist as much. I still have the same resistances that I talked about, a little bit here, a lot here, but it's not the same degree of resistance. The type of resistance and the pieces that have to resist are the same. But the degree of that resistance and the tension that we get as a result of that resistance is less because there's less tension in the sound. There's, relatively speaking. Now, I could, of course, intentionally try to stress at. Now, at what time? Now it's stressed. I need more resistance. I can be saying cat sort of quickly and lazily, and it still will be louder and longer relative to all the unstressed words. But obviously, speed and laziness tends to shrink things. So, relatively, there's still stress and unstress, but everything gets kind of condensed. So, this could be pronounced, if I'm speaking more quickly and lazily, roughly equivalent to how this would be pronounced normally at a more articulated speed. Cat, cat. I saw a cat, 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 cat. So cat, cat, cat. I'm still hitting the right sound. I'm hitting just enough of the right things, getting just enough resistance. Bam. Okay. So generally, the more stressed something is, the more articulated it is. And the more articulated it is, the more it's going to pull on the posture. Right. So the more stressed something is, the more you have to resist in the posture. That's the point. That's how posture ties into stress. Okay? Easy. Wow. Easy concept. Linking and intonation. I'm not even going to talk about intonation, but linking, I think we maybe have talked about that last time a little bit. We talked about the transcription method. Off the top of my head, I can't think of that. I know I've thought of how it ties into linking before. Anyway, that's fine. I'm kind of done for the day anyway. So, but there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if we have any other questions today. We can answer some last minute things. I'm gonna have to. Yep. See, it only goes back so far until the clipboard runs out of space. So I'm gonna have to reopen this for my next class. I'm gonna close that. Don't save. I made that mistake twice actually. I accidentally saved it and I had I had to erase a bunch of stuff and redo the map. It was terrible. Where am I? I'm over here. Not end stream. Stop sharing. That would have been bad. Let me get my chat back. Restore chat. Yeah, we are restored. All right. I'm so ugly. I hate it. So manly looking. So when you don't over articulate, those sounds tend to get pulled toward the because I'd say it is closer to than E is, for example. Well, whether you over articulate or not, the relative position of the sounds are going to be where they are anyway. So like E is slightly farther forward and a little bit higher than I, no matter if it's like, doesn't matter, because even if we compare like a lazy E to like a full I, the only way that it's going to be an E and not be confused between the two, like I'm not sure if you're doing E or I, is you're still in range of the E. So it's not like, oh, the like lazy E is over here and the full I is here. Like that's not how it works. It also has to do with like not just like the positioning, but also like the level of tension that you're using. How are you going all the way up into the E? Or like maybe the height might be a little bit different, but then again, it's still within a particular range. Listen to the sound. Okay, listen to the sound. As long as you sound like you're doing an E, you're doing an E. It sounds going to get pulled toward the right. Okay, so the because that's the center of gravity. That's like the core anchor. That's why it's part of the 5. It's actually like the most important part of the 5 technically, but the back of the tongue itself is very important. It's just again the center of gravity is the center of gravity. It's the core of the balancing act. Everything goes around the earth, right? So whether you're over articulating or not, it's more a question of how much does the have to try to pull against it, right? Because it's like I think I've done this with you before, Martin, and I could go get a hair tie. I'll go get a hair tie. Hold on. I'm wearing my hair tie right now, so I need to go get another one. 1 second. Anything embarrassing behind me? No. Okay. Oh, wait. Did I move it? Oh, no. That's unfortunate. Look at my pajamas. They're so cool. Anyway. I could have swore. Maybe they're in this one. See, this is my lovely dresser. But then I also have another dresser over there because I decided that I needed space in the closet, and I took all the hang-up clothes and I put them in that dresser because I'm complicated. Yes, they're in here with my medical supplies because I'm smart like that. Give me hair tie. I'm never gonna run out of hair ties if I don't lose this thing. Like, I'm still on the first hair tie, and I bought this like over a year ago. Okay, hair tie. This is how the 5 works. This is a very good visual demonstration. Oh my god, of the 5. So, this is a hair tie and rubber band, whatever. Okay, this is your 0 position. Let me see if I can get a good background there. This is your 0 position. So I'm not pulling it. It's just this is slack. This is no slack. So it's just no slack. That's it. No pulling. Just nice, good tension there. That's 0. That's your okay. When you do any other sound, you will have some degree of doing this. Okay. For example, ah is the sound that needs the least 5. Needs just a tiny bit more than that. Again, we don't have to get to exact percentages, but they're very relaxed sounds. Ah is the second most relaxed sound. Is the third most relaxed sound. So if you're like this and say ah is kind of like that. Okay, just a little bit. You just kind of lock in. Fine. Kind of the same thing. If you're doing say like a T, it'd be more like that. If you're doing an sorry, is going to be like that. Very tight. Now, if you're doing a lazier sure, you don't have to do as much, but it's still going to be a lot, right? Because you have to form the sound. Otherwise, you're going to be doing the or something else, right? So everything is always being pulled towards the like it's just the degree. If the sound is lazier, it doesn't need to pull as much, right? Um, it's just a counterbalance. That's all the posture is. It's simply a counterbalance, right? If the sound tries to pull on the 5 in a particular way, you react equally and opposite. It's like physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? Front of the tongue wants to do this and form the T sound. You need an equal and opposite reaction in the 5 to keep the posture there. Equal and opposite reaction in the root to keep it there because it wants to pull the root with it. It wants to pull the 3 up. Maybe push the 3 down. Stabilize. Done. Okay. If you're doing a K, that's going to be a different relationship. It's going to pull on those pieces in a different way. You resist accordingly. Equal and opposite reaction. Okay. If I pull on my hand this way versus pulling on my hand this way, well, if I'm being pulled this way and I don't want to go that way, I'm going to resist over here, right? I'm not going to go with it. But then if I'm being pulled this way by a sound that's on the back, well, I don't want to go with it. I'm going to resist this way now, right? And it's not necessarily a one-to-one, like, okay, the K is here, so the center of gravity goes that way. It doesn't work that way. That would be nice, but it doesn't work that way. Because we don't want to go forward. Forward is not good. Okay, that gives us forward tension. You just don't have to resist as much in the 5 for the K, right? So the direction may not necessarily be always equal and opposite, but it's just trying to keep itself there. That's all. So if we do this, you're not going to keep your posture there. Because the K doesn't affect it that much. The K isn't like doing this. The K is not way back here. The T is way up here. Okay. So that's why we don't have to go this way to counterbalance that. It's just going up. So we just sort of dig in a little bit. It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. But anyway, yeah, hopefully that visual helps. The whole back of the tongue and the throat from 5 to 11. Well, the throat would be below the 6. So whole back of the tongue, that'd be 5, 11. 6 would be under the 11. The 9 is technically kind of in there, but then we would go into the throat, and that would be a different system. So that's not posture. But okay, 5 to 11 is like a solid rock. You should feel it and, of course, use it correctly. In my perspective, it's the key. Solid, yes. I don't know if I would say like a rock because you're not wrong. But when depending on how we describe things, can give certain impressions that we don't necessarily want. Okay, one thing that I'm usually careful to remind people of is, yes, we're resisting. We're maybe getting a little bit of tension to kind of hold things in place. We don't want to add any of your native tension, okay, whatever direction or level of squeezing that is. But you can overdo it, right? If you squeeze too hard, you resist too much, you try to go like disproportionately against the sound where it's like too much, and like you don't need that much. You're going to start bringing in extra tension. You're going to start sounding more closed. You're going to sound tighter. Okay. It's going to start causing problems because you're overdoing it. Right. It's like, if I need to like lift this bottle, I only need this much strength. Why? I wouldn't like do this. Like, why would I do that? Right. It's a dumb example, but you get the idea. But yes, it should be solid, but it should be dynamically adjustable. Right. It's like, as I said, it's like a buoy on water. Like, it's the center of gravity specifically is like a buoy on water. The whole posture, it's like it's just flowing. The sounds are trying to kind of move things around as you're speaking. Okay. And there's maybe a little bit of front to back here and there, kind of very slight. It's mostly going up and down, right? You're hitting a T, you're hitting a K, you're doing whatever. Okay. You're like that. But then when this comes up here, this is going to resist here. And then when this comes back down here and this comes up here, then we're going to resist, right? So the resistance is going on against the sounds, but it's not, if you're solid as a rock, the way that I would think of that is like you're doing like this. Like, you're not, you're too tight. You got to let it kind of flow because, again, American English is generally relaxed, especially relative to the tension settings of other languages. So you need enough tension to get the structure. You need enough tension to resist and hold that structure in place. But beyond that, you don't want to be too tight. Okay. Generally speaking, as you're learning how to do it, you won't do enough. So find the line, overdo it. Don't be afraid to play with it. It's not about getting it right. It's about figuring out what do I need to do? If I do this, does this work? Does it sound better or not? Sure, it sounded better. What if I do more? Does it sound even better or does it sound worse? If it sounds worse, you did too much, or maybe as you tried to go more, you also modified something else. That can happen too. Um, you just literally keep scientific experiment. If I do this, I think I'll sound better. Do I sound better? Yes, no. If yes, keep. If no, you did the wrong thing. You just keep repeating that. But if you have to know like where the sound is, how to articulate the sound, what the posture needs to do, how the posture is going to resist. Once you have that knowledge, then you can figure out like, okay, when I do my T, I need to like, okay, lift the front, make sure this is down, make sure I keep my shape, make sure I have my resistance. And it's a lot to keep track of. That's why we kind of like do it little by little, step by step as we learn. Um, but if your T is not coming out right, right, like for example, a big common problem going into T, if you do a transition, you go what almost like 80% of people that I give that exercise to, they'll start lifting and or tightening the back of the tongue and maybe the root. And so the higher they get, they'll go like they might start perfect. They'll go like that's not what we want. It should sound clear and open and balanced. You're going to hear some sort of change because this is lifting and starting to, create that difference in sound as it goes over, as it closes. But this should not sound any different. It's just sound open. You're still in the nice and clear. Okay. And so if you're trying to do that and you're getting tight like that, well, you're like, okay, well, what's the problem? I know what the problem is. I could just tell you. But if you're trying to figure that out because I just gave you this information on YouTube and you're like, hey, I noticed that when I try to lift, I get like it's not sounding right. Okay, well, maybe you have too much tension on the back of the tongue. Maybe you're letting your posture break and you're coming up. You're squeezing too much. So you can try to relax more. Remember, we want to relax your tension, add our tension, especially for the resistance, but you can't add too much. So you say, well, maybe I have too much of my tension. I got to relax my tension. If you do it more relaxed, and then maybe I can't articulate the sound now. You got to figure out how to do things differently. Maybe you're pushing from here and that's causing the tension because you're trying to lift the front of the tongue with the root. And then you say, I remember I can't do that. I'm going to counterbalance with my root as I try to lift. I'm going to use the hinge instead to try to lift. Okay. And so you start being like, okay, this is what the experience is like of how I balance everything. And you just test based off of the knowledge you have. You just test piece one, piece two, piece three, articulation details. Take what works, what makes you sound better, discard what makes you sound worse. Right. Now, if you work with a teacher, somebody, probably the only person or one of the only people in the world who are very, very knowledgeable about this particular topic of posture, I've found myself in quite the niche, I think, or niche. I like to say niche, but niche, I think most people say. And that's cool for me. But if you don't have to. I try to give you guys all the stuff for free, but it is always easier to work with a teacher. And if you work with me, I can actually help you find what the problem is and just say, hey, you're doing this, and then you don't have to figure it out. You still have to figure out how to make it work, right? Because I say, hey, this is how you open and close your hand. And then you take this and then blah 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 whatever. And then you still have to do that. You have to figure out how to open and close your hand because you're like, well, how do I make the back of the tongue stay low? I told you what you need to do. I can't make you do it, right? It's like grammar. Like you can know all the grammar and still not be able to speak the language because grammar is knowledge. So I'm giving you the knowledge and I'm trying to tell you how to adjust and how to fix problems, but you're the one who has to actually make your muscles do the thing that it needs to do, right? When you work with me as a teacher, I can directly tell you what the problem is, give you immediate feedback so that you know if you're making the right change or not. So obviously that makes the process a lot easier. Not that it's going to be easy, but it will make it a lot easier. So if you can get it on your own using my advice and the information I give you, fantastic. I would love a world where you never have to spend a dime on an English teacher. But I will be here, at least for the time being, and I will offer my services for those who want them. Price has gone up, as I said last time. We're at $80 an hour now, a little bit cheaper if you take get a package on iTalking. Because the course is worth at least that much. It's worth at least that much. There are people who do this similar type of work and they charge $100, $200, $300 an hour, as far as I understand. So it's still cheap. And I know it's still a lot for a lot of people, and I'm sorry, but cost of living, my effort, my time, this is a very niche thing. And, if it's valuable enough, you got to charge for it. So That's one reason why I still want to kind of make content for you guys, because I want to still give you the information. So if you can do it, great. But otherwise, here's an advertisement. Okay, we'll finish up here. I asked that question because to my ear, most sounds tended to sound a shade closer to articulation-wise when they're not over-articulated. Yes, because the center of gravity is always there. Remember, we start from and the is under everything. Okay, it's always there. Now, if you try to fully clearly articulate an and say an e at the same time, you're going to end up with some weird mesh in between, something like that. So it's not like you're fully forming an but that sort of little pressure there, that resistance, that shape. Again, the shape is very important for helping to keep the center of gravity there. It's always going to be there to some extent, right? Like the true schwa, that little that's always going to be under. It's just that when you articulate a different sound, it overpowers that. So you get to keep your posture and your little schwa underneath. That's going to sort of pull, resist and pull things into it, while we actually hear what the other sound is that you're trying to do. So most sounds tended to sound a shade closer to articulation-wise when they're not over-articulated. Yeah, because the more you articulate, the more you're leaving the right? Like if I have to go all the way up here and like get this nice and tight for E, but then if I don't go quite as much, right? It's as I said, it's not necessarily going to like come back to I, but if it kind of relaxes a little bit, the doesn't have to resist as much, doesn't have to pull it as much, and so whether we can even say like tension wise, it's closer to it's not necessarily like position wise. It's also, we could say tension wise closer to because is the most relaxed sound in the language, right? So less tension for the E, it's going to be closer to the right? In some way. Anyway, so I see a person that says and for 30 minutes. I want to answer that really quick. I know there's a couple from Sam there. 30 minutes. I can actually show you guys. I'm really gonna have to go soon, but shameless promotion time. Teacher settings, lessons and availability. Okay, so this is the class right here. This one, unfortunately, if you've worked with me before, this is available until March. It's the old pricing before the first, before I changed it on the first of the year. If you're new, you have to go here. I'm sorry. It's just how it is. I was telling you guys that this was happening. And if you didn't sign up, you didn't sign up. So you're going to go here. That's not what I wanted. Well, okay, this is what I wanted. So it's $80 an hour. If you take a single class, you can buy 5 lessons for $365, which is 9% off. It comes out to $73 per lesson. Or if you buy 10 at a time, it's $720, which comes out to $72 per lesson. 30 minutes, I have set at 45. I have it a bit pricier because I actually might adjust this down a little bit, but it's pricier because I like to encourage the hour lessons, because half hours, like the course, unfortunately, is not optimized for half hours. It's usually, and that's like even like outside of the course, just like generally teaching half-hour classes. It's like right when we really get started, the class is over. So, because like we check the homework, we start like, analyzing some things, maybe like learning some new details or whatever. And then it's like, we're really in the roll of things. And then bam, 30 minutes is up. Where if we have that hour, we have like more time to kind of like, we don't have to rush things, we can kind of like go through things. And so it is technically cheaper directly because it's only 30 minutes. You can get a package for that, again, about 7% off for $42 per class. So that brings it to almost half the base price of a single lesson for $80. And that's an option if you want to do that. But I do strongly encourage this. And also I have, course starter document and agreement for taking classes. I give this to you guys in the first class. Usually I remember to do that. We have the reference recordings, blah, 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 Audacity for you to download, et cetera, et cetera. Agreement. I must consistently attend class at least 1 hour each week. Okay. Because it's a little pricey and because not everybody can afford that, if we can work out something special and you have lots of time outside of class, because again, most of the work is done outside of class, but if you have extra time outside of class and you can only pay me for 30 minutes a week, we can maybe work something out, but that's very much not recommended. Barring some sort of special arrangement, this is my basic standard policy, at least 1 hour each week. So that would be $80 a week if you take single classes. You will be dropped if you don't follow that consistently. We can reschedule sometimes, things happen. That's fine. If you miss 1 or 2 weeks, it's not a big deal. I mean, it is kind of a big deal, but I won't drop you for it. If consistently every other class we're missing, or I don't see you like, every like 2 or 3 weeks, I'm not going to work with you because in my experience, this is the minimum needed to make consistent, steady progress. It's the bare minimum. And that's if you're doing everything right outside of class. So that's like borderline, right? Ideally, you'd be do 2 hours a week, preferably three, just because that's best for the feedback. But two is usually a happy medium for most people. I understand with the price, if you can only do 1 hour a week, that's fine. It will work. We can maybe optimize what you do outside of class and really focus on that a little bit more. But number two, I must consistently complete all the homework, including any recordings. You will be assigned recordings to do, which we're going to use in class to help train your ear and help give you better feedback. If you don't do this, you will be dropped. Okay. Sometimes we don't have the homework. We're extra busy. Things happen. Your dog ate your digital file. I get it. Right. That's fine. But if it happens consistently, again, every other class, multiple classes in a row, it's annoying me. I feel like you're wasting my time. I'm wasting your time. I'm wasting your money. We have to do the homework. We have to make enough time outside of class to do this. Okay. You have to be serious. You have to be consistent. If you're not, I don't want to work with you. Not because I don't like you, but because my experience tells me that you're going to spin your wheels and it's just not going to go well. I've had a couple exception cases to that. So people who have a little bit of talent going for them and they can kind of, cut corners. But for most people, the average person doesn't have any special talent, but they can still learn this stuff. You have to be doing this, what I tell you to do consistently, putting in the effort outside of class that you need to do. I must consistently do more than the minimum effort. You will not be dropped. You will not be dropped. But I strongly recommend that you do this because the students who really put in that extra work, they're extra motivated. They're getting extra repetitions. You're doing the dishes and you're like, whatever. Obviously, you can't have your full resources because you're doing the dishes. Don't cut yourself or anything. Some people do it while driving, which for legal reasons I don't recommend, but I have students who do that. You do need to have sit down focused time outside of class, at least say 30 minutes to an hour every day or almost every day. That's where you really use all your brain resources, monitor closely, make little adjustments. That's necessary for this kind of work. Outside of that, outside of your basic core practice, you're in the elevator, you're driving to work, maybe you're in the shower, you're doing dishes. You don't have to do it all day, every day. That's not the most effective thing, but you take advantage of those little moments to get some extra repetitions in, and it will help. Okay. I know that from personal experience. As in me being a learner, not a teacher. So you won't be dropped if you don't put in that extra little bit, but it will help a lot and you will improve more quickly, generally. Okay. Especially if you are sort of on the weaker side, like you don't have talent and you're a little below average, you're going to need that extra. Like otherwise, like some people really struggle with it, and it is what it is. We all have our different strengths and weaknesses. You can still learn this stuff, but yeah, it can be tough for some people. So that's a nice little advertisement. Whenever I watch the old videos, I never skipped 10, 15-minute ads. This is the best I can do. Thank you for teaching us information quality lessons. Your channel is absolutely top notch. Can't thank you enough. Best English teacher. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I get that a lot. No, thank you. I really appreciate that. They give you 10 to 15-minute ads. That's crazy. I don't even want you to do that. Like, don't waste your life. Like, maybe if you put it on in the background and come back, I guess, but like, that's a little much. I didn't know they had 15-minute ads. That's crazy. Got to make that money, I guess, YouTube. You pay me a little bit more if you're going to be putting 10 to 15-minute ads on people. Jeez. But anyway, no, that's fine. That's cool. I appreciate that. I like when people say that because it's one way to show that you care. Yeah, that helps. I'm still the funny thing is from like when I stopped making videos, like what was it like almost like 2 years ago, 2.5 years now ago now. Um, I was making, I think it was like I got up to like $60 a month. Like that was like the max that I got up to. And then since I've stopped making videos, it's been like between 40 and $60 a month, even though I haven't been making any videos. And so that's cool. The channel's continued to grow, even though I've done almost nothing on the channel. That's cool as well. Um, but it's like I'm still making about the same amount. Uh, and so yeah, like I only get paid once every like 2 months at the most because I need to hit 100 in my AdSense account before it will go to my bank. So yeah, if you guys watch the ads and make me a little more money, I appreciate that. I don't think I deserve it since I'm not really making much content these days, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So the is like the secondary pressure. Yeah, that's a way that I've described it in the past. If you're doing right, it's like the is the Earth, and then all the other sounds of the moon. It sort of like goes around the Earth. The Earth will keep the moon in orbit, but the moon has its own pull on the Earth, so that's why we need the counterbalance. If you're doing the as a sound, the Earth or the moon is inside the Earth. They're at the same position. And so you're articulating the as a separate sound. But then the moon is going to, sort of go off and do its thing and form an E or whatever it is. And then so the earth is still there. It doesn't go away, right? But it becomes secondary where the moon is like we're focused on the moon. We're trying to make that moon sort of like pulled away from the earth. So that we can form the other sound. Yeah. There's different ways to look at it. That's one way I like. For some people that's a little confusing. Okay. Um, yeah, and when you work with me, uh, usually, especially for certain points, like what does it feel like to put a sound on the tongue? I have like a couple different ways to approach that. One way works really well for most people, confuses other people. So I have like another way to explain it, and that usually works for most other people. So as we go through the process, I usually have like multiple ways to look at it because again, a lot of this is like this is how it is, but there's different ways to look at things, right? Like we talked about with like the sides of the tongue being in the middle being higher than the body of the middle. I used to say, well, you can look at that as like this, the tongue, the sides are lifting up to the teeth or the tongue's hanging off of the teeth. They're both ways to look at it. Nowadays, I say we shouldn't really use the first one because that can cause problems. You're actually like you're low and you're trying to like tense upward. So it tends to get in the way, but that is one way to describe it and think about it. It's just for a lot of people, I learned through experience, thinking about it that particular way causes problems. So if we think about it as we're hanging off of the teeth, that usually works better for most people. So there's always like I'm always trying to come up with like new and different things of ways so that as many people as possible can understand it because we all think differently. And I'm trying to cover everybody as much as I can. At the end of the day, everything works, but not everything works for everybody. So some people, this posture thing, it's just not going to work with their brain very well. They're going to be like, no, this is too much. This is crazy. I don't get it. And then fine. If you want the accent, you do have to get the posture, but it is possible to get the posture without studying the posture. If you mimic closely enough and you figure out how to do that, but you're going to have to get the posture one way or another. You can't have the accent without the posture. The posture is basically the accent, like 80%. So, that's a mistake I do a lot. I'm always trying to over-articulate sound at the start of sentences. Yeah, don't do that. Especially at the start of a sentence, and especially if it's an unstressed word. Don't do that. And the sound articulation is the main pressure. Yeah. Yeah, I get your explanations very long. I know, right? Sorry. That's just how I work. I know it's annoying to people. Blame the autism or the ADHD. I forget which one. As I said, I'm pretty sure I have both. I know I'm neurodivergent. I have nothing else. I don't like saying that I have those because I've not been diagnosed, but like I'm like 99% certain I have ADHD and I'm like 60-70% certain I also have autism. Which is cool because that's how I have my superpower of being able to like hear what you're saying and then map it to my tongue. Like I have students like almost like every week. Like this happened yesterday where I had a student and she was like, I was listening to her recording and I was like, I think it was like with the ooh sound. And I was like, okay. And I was showing her on the map. I was like, it sounds like your ooh is a little too high. It's a little too tight. You're slightly pushing forward and almost like your tongue is kind of trying to do this a little bit. Um, and then I forget what else I said. And she's like, "That's so scary." I was like, "What?" And she's like, "That's exactly what I was doing." I was like, "I know, because I can hear it. I can hear it on the recording." Like you guys don't even understand. You think like the information I give you and the way I explain things are good. Like work with me. I will blow your mind with the things that I can hear. That's my superpower, and I'm pretty sure it's because I have autism. Or I'm neurodivergent. We'll say that much at least. Not that you can't develop that type of thing. I've taught plenty of people to hear things better. You'll do that through the course, but it's something that I sort of have naturally more or less always been able to do. And I've gotten better at it as I've paid more attention to things. But um anyway, that's not the point. Yes, I ramble. I tend to want to start from the beginning. Like if like your question is here, like not in the queue, but like your question is about this. And I'm like, well, in order to understand this, we should probably understand X, Y, and Z first. So I'll start here and then work my way to that. I know that's annoying to some people. I'm sorry, but I want to give you the full picture. And then people who may not know that information, maybe you know that information, but other people don't. I'm in a live stream talking to a bunch of people. I want to make sure that we don't miss any details because then people are going to get confused. I'm sorry. It's just how it is. It's not a bad thing that your explanation is like, hey, good. I know for some people it is a bad thing, and they're like, just get to the point. And then I go off on a tangent. I do all this stuff, and the live stream is crazy, and whatever. All right, that's as I said, the classes are more controlled. I have a script to go off of. It doesn't get so crazy, but in the live stream, people are asking me different things, and it seems very chaotic. So it is what it is. This is like interacting with me in real life. Okay. Absolutely. I always want to stay more. 1 hour is not enough. Exactly. Right. La La Land. Welcome, La La Land. Right as we're about to leave here in a minute, I gotta really go. I have like 20 minutes till my class. I just realized this looks probably weird. I'm just doing this. I fidget with things. I always like this. I'm playing with this thing all day. It's like I'm telling you, probably the ADHD. Okay. Or no, yeah, it's I'm stimming basically, probably. I don't know how it works. I don't know. I'm not educated. I just like I know I have some sort of thing. I need medication. It's actually been getting really bad over the last couple months too. My dog did eat my homework once. Funny, yeah, I know. I just like that joke because it's like obviously you're not giving me any papers, and it's like that's the common excuse. My dog ate my homework. It's like, well, hey, I know your dog probably ate your MP3 file, but that's no excuse, right? Like you should have made a copy. Anyway, I'm so funny. How's that possible? We submit the recording to Kat and I talking. Well, yeah, I mean, you have to like take my class. You don't do it here. I don't know what that's responding to. Or that was responding to me, which was what I was saying, but it's not a bad thing that I already said that. I'm the opposite of you. I speak for a few seconds and there's an awkward silence because I have nothing to say. That's my default mode. Like if you put me in a social situation, I won't know what to say. But if I'm and then when I'm like hanging out with like friends, especially closer friends, like I don't feel like I have to say anything. I'm just generally actually a pretty quiet person. But here, obviously, I'm here. I'm not going to sit here and just be like, we're just chilling, right? Like I'm here to talk to you guys, and I'm talking about something that I'm interested in and very knowledgeable about. And so, of course, I'm going to be talking a lot. So when I am engaged in something and I'm, excited to talk about something, you're going to get this. But literally most of my day is just I'm just like if I'm not doing DoorDash, my second job, and I'm not teaching classes, I'm literally just like sitting here and just like I don't even use my voice most of the day. I'm just like on the computer doing whatever. I'll go get a snack, see my roommate, not say anything. Like so that's usually how it is for like the quieter people. Is like if you get us on something that we're interested in talking about, we'll just talk. We'll just go crazy. Like it looks like we're extroverts, but then most of the time, we're hibernating basically. Like we don't want to talk to anybody. So yeah. And I actually think, as a tangent, I'm pretty sure there's evidence that I have. I don't know how all of developmental psychology works, but um, I've had to study some of it for various reasons. It seemed like before the age of like 3 or 4, which is 4 to 6, 3 to 6 is usually when sense of gender develops. But before the age of 3 or 4, I was very extroverted. Like I used to go out into like the living room when my mom had like guests over or whatever, and I would like dance around, which I don't remember doing that, but they tell me that like, I used to dance around and I would be silly and stuff. And then I'd be like, that doesn't sound like me at all. That sounds horrifying. Why would I do that? And then after I accepted myself and came out to myself and then started coming out to other people, and I've been able to be more expressive and stuff, and actually feel more. Like I feel like I sort of lost my soul for most of my life and now I have it back. Um, Sorry, that's probably a very loud noise in the background. I feel like hopefully that's not completely distorted. I feel like I now am becoming a bit more extroverted in a way. It's like I still have an introvert base, but I want to be more expressive. I want to go do things now where before I didn't. Um, Maybe I'm just adjusting, but yeah, so I don't actually know if I'm an introvert or extrovert. I don't know if like I was an extrovert and then because of the terrible, terrible repression that I went through as my sense of gender was developing in order to survive, because the message I was getting is that you cannot be loved and accepted as who you are. So I repressed myself so heavily I didn't even know that it was there. And then I spent 30 years like that. I don't know if maybe that's part of why I was introverted, because like literally my soul was being like trapped in a box. We'll find out as I continue my transition. Hopefully I don't get Nazis. Yahtzees, sorry. There goes the whole monetization of the live stream. My bad. You know what I mean. I'm sure you guys pay attention to the news of what's going on here. It's a scary time. I'm actually getting kind of afraid to go outside. You're like an extrovert when you speak to us. Yeah, I know. That's what I come across as, because I actually like talking about this stuff. I don't know. Whatever. I gotta go. I have a class in 15 minutes or so. So thank you guys very much. It was good hanging out. Hopefully what I explained was not confusing. I know it can be that way. I'm kind of trying to do more frequent live streams, if for no other reason than to just like advertise the class, because I need more students. I need to make more money. Times are tough, probably for everybody, but that's one reason why I raised the price, because the course is at a really good solid place now. I feel like I can charge that much, but it's also like I need more money. So yeah. Thanks for the long stream. In a good way. Thanks. With everything crazy going on right now, like the tragedy the other day, stay safe. Yeah, thanks. I know. Yeah, we're living in interesting times. Interesting times is one way to put it. Thank you so much, Kat. You're welcome. Thank you as well. All right, so I'm gonna go. I don't know when the next one will be. Maybe I might randomly feel like doing another one next week. Just, I don't know. It is what it is. So I'll see you guys whenever it is. I make no promises. But maybe next week after that, we'll see. All right. Thank you and bye. I love you all.